Good day, everyone. My name is Ciro Dias-Reis. I'm the president of PR and public affairs company Imagem Corporativa from Brazil. We work on a global basis because of our international partnerships. We are here in Brussels for the European Day. This seminar, Imagem Corporativa organizes every year in São Paulo. This year, we decided to move it to Brussels because it's here that will take place the ratification process of the free trade agreement, European Union, Mercosul. As you know, the agreement was signed last December by the European Commission. Now, the document is being translated into 23 different languages before being submitted to European Commission and then the European Parliament. So there's still a long journey ahead in order to see the agreement ratified. And that's why we are here. We picked up 4 specific topics for 4 specific panels on environment, industry and services, and agribusiness, and government procurement. 4 very important pillars of this free trade agreement. For that aim, we have here 14 specialists to discuss all those topics. Before the 4 panels, we will be hearing from Mr. Elias Antonio, who is Minister Counselor of the Brazilian Trade Mission in Brussels. He will share with us some perceptions and information about the free trade agreement. And after Mr. Elias Antonio, we will hear from Mr. Olivier Lloris, who represents Fédération des Entreprises de Belgique, the #1 business organization in Belgium. And at the end, we will have a wrap-up session in order to share some perceptions from our side as takeaways for Brazilians and Brazilian companies and Brazilian organizations in order for them to be more prepared for this new trade relations with Europe after the ratification process. The ones interested in addressing questions to the speakers, we suggest that you write down those questions in the chat, and we will be sharing the questions to the speakers for direct responses after the event. This is because we have a limited time for all those speakers, all those panels, but please feel free to address your questions. The ones who want to listen to the transmission in Portuguese, very easy. You just click in your screen to select the language, okay? So without any further delay, I want to pass the floor to the Mr. Counselor of the Brazilian Trade Mission in Brussels, Mr. Elias Antonio Santos. Please, Mr. Elias.
So thank you very much for inviting us to participate in this event. I will speak in English. I was asked to speak in English, although we know that the audience, and there is a large audience in Brazil for these events. So I'll try to provide you with a brief overview of the agreement, the current status of the agreement, also the reasoning behind this last phase of the negotiation in 2023, 2024, and finish with some remarks about the significance of the agreement, both strategic significance and also trade significance of the agreement for Mercosul and for Brazil. So regarding the status of the agreement, what happened in December of 2024 in Montevideo was that Mercosul and the EU announced the conclusion of the negotiations. And as you said, we are at the stage where both parties are engaged in finalizing what's called legal scrubbing or legal revision of the agreement. Of course, a lot of work had already been done on the basis of the text that had been agreed in principle in 2019, so the work is quite advanced. One thing that both parties highlighted in December 2024 when the negotiation was concluded is that there are no pending substantive issues. So the agreement that was reached this time is final. So what we have today is this process of legal revision, which is, as I said, is quite advanced. And as you said, particularly here in the EU, there is this process of translating the agreement to the many national languages of the European bloc. One thing that is important to say is that, of course, there is much of the discussion recently has been focused on the process of ratification in the EU, which is fair. Much of the controversy around the agreement has been taking place here in the EU as well. But there is also a ratification process in Brazil and in the other Mercosur state parties. So I wanted to underline that. And of course, in the case of Brazil, in the case, I believe, of the other Mercosur state parties, there is ample support to the agreement. Of course, there are some concerns, sectoral concerns, but and particularly a concern with regards to some EU policies which may affect trade, but there is ample support for the agreement. But the National Congress of Brazil and the parliaments of the Mercosur state parties will have a say on the agreement as well. So I wanted to highlight that. So we need to wait for what's going to happen during the course of this year. In the case of the EU, as I think is well known here in this audience, the Commission makes a proposal to the Council, and then the Council, once the agreement is approved at the Council, the agreement can be submitted to Parliament. And I think the expectation is that during this year, this process, at least in the context of the EU institutions, might reach a conclusion. But I think you have a speaker here from the Commission which might talk a little bit in more detail about that. Secondly, what I wanted to talk about, I wanted to deal with the issue, or to explain a little bit this last phase of the negotiation, which was a convergence of a desire, actually on both sides, to improve the agreement and to build on the text that existed from 2019. So there was a demand from the EU to have an additional instrument on sustainable development. The agreement already had a very ambitious trade and sustainable development chapter, as you all know, but there was this interest on the part of the EU, given the political circumstances here in the EU, to have that additional instrument. There was an interval until of time until the EU presented a proposal, but then in the beginning of 2023, Mercosur also wanted to, introduce some new elements to improve the agreement in order to allow for a space for Mercosur countries to undertake development and industrial policies. So starting 2023, it was a priority for Brazil and its partners in Mercosur to have introduce those elements into the agreement, to make the agreement also an opportunity for Brazil to undertake those development policies. So this is reflected in a number of parts in the agreement regarding the automotive sector, export duties, and government procurement, and so on and so forth. In addition to that, Brazil and Mercosur, and its Mercosur partners also wanted to, also had interest, or wanted to have its own perspective on sustainable development reflected in the additional instrument on trade and sustainable development. So it was not only the EU which wanted to have some elements of sustainable development added to the agreement. So Mercosur also wanted to take that opportunity to introduce into the agreement, or to incorporate into the agreement, its own views, its own perspective. So a number of elements were added or were proposed to the EU, and the result is what you see published in our websites and also in the EU's platforms. In our case, I think a number of our interests and perspectives were reflected in the result, in the outcome of the negotiation, such as the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, the acknowledgement of the three dimensions of sustainable development, not only the environmental dimension, but also the social and economic dimensions. I can give you some examples of that. So there are provisions regarding the bioeconomy, so the need to provide opportunities for the bioeconomy, and also the importance of combating hunger and poverty, which is also reflected in was also a priority for Brazil during its G20 presidency last year. So these are a few examples, but there are more examples in the TSD or additional instrument, which I think are a reflection of that interest of Mercosur of having also its perspective on sustainable development reflected in the additional instrument. Finally, I'll just briefly outline some of the elements which, in our view, make this agreement not only strategic, but also transformative. These are some of the words that were used to announce the agreement when it was finalized in December, but I wanted to maybe provide some points to illustrate that. So I think point one is that the agreement will be an opportunity to diversify Mercosur exports to the EU and Brazilian exports to the EU as well. Diversify trade in general, but particularly our exports, which are concentrated today in a few number of commodities, which is okay, but we think that the FTA part of the agreement will be an opportunity to expand our trade with the EU. Brazil has traditionally been and seen itself as a global trader. So the agreement also represents an opportunity to diversify or trade in terms of export destinations. So in the last few decades, we see a rising share of exports going to Asian markets, particularly China, but not only China. So Asia accounts for roughly 40% of our exports today, of our foreign trade today, probably 45% of our exports, while the EU accounts for 13%, 15% of our overall trade if you consider exports and imports. So we think that the agreement is an opportunity to again, maybe expand our trade with the EU and allow for that share of trade with the EU to represent the aspiration of Brazil to be in that reality of Brazil as a global trader. Secondly, the agreement also represents an instrument for strengthening Mercosur as a platform for the participation of Mercosur state parties in international trade and in the international economy, a platform for the integration of our economies, or for the international integration of our economies. And it's important to note that it's actually the second agreement that we have reached since 2023. So at the end of 2023, Mercosur finalized an agreement with Singapore. So now at the end of 2024, we have finished or concluded this agreement with the European Union. The third, I think, point regarding this strategic and transformative aspect of the agreement has to do with the strengthening of the bilateral strategic partnership between Brazil and the EU. So speaking for Brazil, we think that the agreement is also a plus, and we will also, I think, foster our bilateral relationship with the EU. I have other elements here, but I will finalize with one, I think, probably systemic aspect of the agreement, which is the consolidation of Brazil's preference and choice for an open economy. We talk a lot in Brazil about fiscal monetary policy, but trade policy is also part of the framework of good economic policy, and we think that the EU-Mercosur agreement is proof that Brazil is on a course of consolidating good, responsible economic policy and open trade policy and stable trade policy as well, based on rules. And with that, we have consistently reaffirmed our commitment to the international or to multilateral system based on rules. And that is reflected both in our commitment to the WTO rules and in our commitment to agreements such as the Mercosul-UE agreement. So I think I'll stop here, and I am available to questions if there are any. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Minister from the Brazilian Trade Mission, Mr. Elias Antonio Santos. Very important topics, and it's interesting that I'm sure Mr. Olivier Lloris from the Fédération des Entreprises de Belgique, he has other very interesting approaches coming from the Belgium point of view. So thank you, Mr. Elias Antonio, and please, Monsieur Olivier.
Thank you very much, and ladies and gentlemen, good morning there, good afternoon here. It's better with a mic. So, good morning there, good afternoon here, ladies and gentlemen. So, first of all, on behalf of the Federation of Enterprises in Belgium, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me for this important event. Indeed, my name is Olivier Joris. I'm the Executive Manager of our Department of European and International Affairs, and I'm very delighted to briefly explain you the importance of the EU-Mercosur agreement from indeed the Belgium and European perspective. But before to do this, maybe just a few words about my federation. The FEB is the largest employers organization here in Belgium. We represent over 40 sectorial organizations which encompass more than 50,000 companies active in the 3 regions of the country. And the FEB is the Belgian member of the European Employers Organization called Business Europe. And together with our sister federations in all the member states, we aim through Business Europe to build a strong and competitive Europe. And this includes remaining open to the world. And this is really key for us, for the FEB here in Belgium. Indeed, as you may know, Belgium is one of the most economy in the world. 1 job out of 3 in Belgium depends on export, and the total value of our export represents more than 85% of our GDP. So definitely a very open economy. And therefore my federation is strongly convinced of the importance of the EU trade policy and of the free trade agreements negotiated by the Commission on behalf of the 27 member states. These are very key to diversify the export and the import of Belgium and of the whole EU. Finally, we are also quite active in the field of economic diplomacy, and just to give you an example, last November we took part in a very successful economic mission to Brazil led by Her Royal Highness Princess Astrid. So let's move now to the subject of today, the EU-Mercosur agreement. So this agreement is a very important one for us here in Belgium. Indeed, Mercosur is our 8th largest trading partner outside the EU, and it represents a very important market for our businesses. In 2021, Belgium exported to Mercosur goods worth 4.5 billion euros, and we imported from Mercosur goods worth 2.6 billion euros. More than 1,600 Belgian companies have direct trade with Mercosur, of which 83% are SMEs, and broadly 37,000 jobs in Belgium are linked to our export to Mercosur. So Mercosur is definitely a very important trade partner for us. So let me maybe briefly highlight 7 reasons why my federation, the Federation of Enterprises in Belgium, supports the EU-Mercosur deal, and the minister just before already, of course, referred to some of these reasons. So the first reason, and one of the key advantages of the EU-Mercosur agreement, is the substantial reduction in tariffs. Indeed, the agreement will eliminate tariffs on 91% of goods traded between the EU and Mercosur, making trade in both directions more cost-effective and competitive. For Belgian exporters, this means lower costs and improved market access for products such as chemicals, pharmaceuticals, food products like the delicious beer or Belgian chocolate. Current import tariffs in Mercosur for these products vary today between 14 and 20%, and the very large majority of these tariffs will be lifted. The second good reason to support the deal is that this agreement also addresses non-tariff barriers, which have historically hindered trade between the EU and the Mercosur countries. By aligning regulatory standards and custom procedures, the agreement will simplify trade and reduce administrative burdens. This will enable Belgian companies to navigate the Mercosur market more efficiently and effectively, and vice versa for Mercosur companies trading with or in the EU. The third reason, and the minister also referred to it, is that the EU-Mercosur agreement also emphasizes sustainable development and social welfare. Indeed, it includes commitments to uphold environmental standards, to combat illegal deforestation, and to respect International Labour Organization core conventions. By promoting sustainable practices, the agreement ensures that trade contributes to long-term economic growth on both sides, while safeguarding the environmental and social well-being. The fourth reason is that the agreement provides enhanced market access for service providers, not only for goods, but also for services. Indeed, sectors such as business services, financial services, telecoms, e-commerce, transport, or environmental services will benefit from improved opportunities to establish and to operate in Mercosur countries and in the EU. This will create new avenues for companies to expand their activities and offer their expertise in these dynamic markets. The fifth reason is linked to the geopolitical situation. Indeed, in the current very challenging context, the context indeed underscores the importance of the EU-Mercosur agreement. In a world marked by trade tensions, even trade war, and shifting alliances, including between partners, diversifying our trade partner and trade flows is crucial. The agreement with Mercosur offers the EU and Belgium a unique opportunity to strengthen economic ties with the Mercosur region. By fostering closer relations with Mercosur, Belgium can reduce its dependencies on other major economies and enhance its resilience to face global uncertainties. The sixth reason is that the agreement will promote and secure predictable access to critical raw materials, strengthening the EU's position in global supply chains and boosting its resilience to further disruptions. Businesses will benefit from stable, predictable access to critical raw materials, indispensable for the green and the digital transition, and of which Mercosur countries are major producers. And finally, last reason is the fact that beside our offensive priorities and interests, the FAB also takes into account our more defensive interest and priorities. Therefore, we are glad to see that the agreement includes robust safeguard measures to protect against potential market disruptions. These measures ensure that businesses on both sides, in the EU and in the Mercosur countries, are not affected by sudden surges in import or unfair trade practices. The agreement also mandates continuous monitoring of trade flows and implementation of safeguard measures when necessary. This provides a safety net for all businesses here and there, allowing them to compete on a level playing field. So, in conclusion, this agreement is an important step towards a more prosperous future for the EU and for Mercosur. Indeed, the agreement offers significant benefits to entrepreneurs in Brazil, in the whole Mercosur, and in the EU, such as I say, tariff reductions, improved market access, and better alignment between the EU and Brazil. This is why the FAB, together with Business Europe and 77 other business associations from both sides, have issued some months ago a joint statement to support the agreement. And this document was co-signed by Brazilian associations such as FIESP, Federação das Indústrias do Estado de São Paulo, for example. And together we have called for a fast conclusion and swift ratification of the agreement. And at the FAB we remain committed to supporting this agreement and to collaborating with all stakeholders to ensure its successful implementation. And with this in mind, and to conclude, I would like to stress the importance of informing companies in Europe and in the Mercosur about the content of this agreement and its benefits for both sides. Similarly, after the agreement has been ratified, it will be key and necessary to explain to companies the few administrative formalities they will have to complete in order to fully benefit from it, once again, here in Europe and in the Mercosur. Therefore, I would like once again to congratulate the organizers for organizing this event aimed at presenting in very concrete terms the deal to entrepreneurs, and I wish you all very interesting discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olivier Joris, and very interesting approach, because we had very good perceptions from both sides of the Atlantic. So, and with this, we paved the way for the next discussions and the 4 panels that we have ahead. So thank you again, Mr. Councillor Elias Antonio Santos from the Brazilian Trade Mission here in Brussels, Mr. Olivier Joris from the Fédération des Entreprises Belgique. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, we will be starting the first panel now which is related to environment. And I will be facilitator of this panel, the first panel and the second panel. And the third and the fourth panel we'll have Lucila, my colleague Lucila Ribeiro, as a facilitator. So I want to invite Colombe Varin and Mariana Fleischhauer to join me. And we have Leonardo Fleck connected from Brazil. So I start introducing our speakers here. Mariana Fleischhauer is manager of FGV Europe offices. FGV is a top Brazilian business school. Mariana came from Cologne in Germany for this seminar. So thank you, Mariana, for that. Colombe Varin is a professional specialized in green projects, and she is a project advisor on sustainability and biodiversity programs in the European Commission, and lecturer at top French school, Sciences Po in Paris. Leonardo Fleck is sustainability director in Brazil of Santander. Santander is the #1 bank in the Eurozone and leading financial institution in Latin America. Leonardo is connected with us from Brazil. So thank you all for being available for this discussion. Well, environment. This has been a very sensitive topic since the final negotiations EU-Mercosur started. And it's a subject embedded in a way or another with reasonable layer of disinformation. So there are facts, there are challenges in this area, of course, but there's also some misinformation. And our aim here is to discuss a little bit of this. European Union is working to be carbon neutral by 2050 and establish many steps in order to get there, including 2030 goal, which is reducing by 55% green gas emissions compared to the 1990 levels. And when I mentioned some misinformation about environmental issues regarding Brazil, one is we need to recognize that deforestation is a problem. It's a challenge to be neutralized. But on the other hand, Brazil has a very clean energy matrix. More than 1/3 of the matrix is based on wind, solar, biomass. We have a very strong source of hydroelectric powers. So it's a very clean matrix. So it's something that sometimes people forget here in Europe. But, you know, there are the two sides of this coin to be discussed. And finally, COP30 in Belém, in the Amazon region, by the end of the year, will, in a way or another, impulsionate a little bit more companies and organizations in Brazil towards more green solutions. Having said that, I want to start addressing some questions and asking for some perceptions from our speakers today. And I start asking you, Colombe Varin, with your experience in the green solutions, many years working for the European Commission. What type of learning Brazil can get from the long journey, the long European journey towards green solutions? What can we learn from you guys?
Thank you very much, Cyril. And Thank you very much, Ciro, for inviting me and also for having the opportunity to discuss this very crucial issue, which is the environment within the EU-Mercosur trade agreement. I must say, I mean, most of our European audience here knows that the EU has been at the forefront for everything regarding the environment, and especially since the past mandate of Ursula von der Leyen, who is the president of the European Commission, and she began her mandate in December 2019, setting up the big strategy for her 5 years mandate with what we call the EU Green Deal. Most of people here must have heard about it. And in fact, the EU Green Deal is a kind of chapeau, a kind of umbrella that embraces a number of strategies, action plans, but also regulations. And I wanted to also to talk a bit about these regulations, also to explain how Brazil can indeed learn from that. The first one, and you mentioned it in your introduction, Ciro, I wanted to talk about the EU deforestation regulation. Indeed, in the EU, we really want to to prevent deforestation and to work more on the protecting and on having a land use which is better, and this is better for our farmers, this is better for everybody. So definitely, I know, and this has been some discussions over the negotiation of the EU-Mercosur trade agreement, that the EU was expecting the members of the Mercosur, including Brazil, obviously, to trace the products that are coming to Europe. And this is obviously for the sake of both continents, and it affects definitely cocoa, coffee, soy, I mean, those elements which are commodities that Brazil, I mean, also import here in Europe. The second one that you mentioned as well, Ciro, I think it's a very important one. It's renewable energy, and I think we can both benefit from that. So there's also a regulation, we love regulation here in Europe, the renewable energy regulation, and the aim of this regulation is really to have, in 2050, 32% of energy consumption coming from renewables, and I know Brazil is doing quite well in that. We are also some EU member states among the 27 that are very at the forefront again regarding that. And the obvious idea is to reduce the greenhouse emissions, obviously. The third example that we discussed a bit less, at least in the media, but I want to tackle it because I think it's a very important link to our planet in general, is everything regarding the pollution of the land and the pollution of the water, especially the rivers, etc., which are a key driver for anything that we have for our farmers, but also in general for our population. And there's also here in the EU a new regulation that has been just adopted last August called the Nature Restoration Law. And this is to make some key areas that are more protected in order to have a better and a more healthy planet. So it looks a bit imposing, what I say, regarding the regulation that we have on this side of the Atlantic. But I wanted also to showcase that in this EU-Mercosur agreement, we have designed some elements that both parties can overall discussed during the implementation, hopefully very soon, of this EU trade agreement. And the first one, if I take the side of Brazil, there is what we call in the agreement the rebalancing mechanisms. So that is a mechanism that in case Brazil, for example, let's take this example, finds the EU standards, as we call them, regarding environment, too strong, or if they see them as a trade barrier, they can make an adjustment, or they can even make a compensation, what we call, I want to be very clear with the terminology. On the other side, so on the European side, let's say, I don't know if you followed from Brazil or Argentina, but there were a lot before the signing of the trade agreement in December of protests from farmers mainly, especially from some countries like France, against the EU trade agreement. And the main concern for farmers, that by the way receive 33% of the EU budget in total, were that they were afraid that it would, this EU trade agreement, if it comes into force, will induce bad competition for the goods. This has been discussed lengthily and explained lengthily in articles, reports, that it will not be the case. And that, for example, if I take an example again, the beef, the importation of beef is something like 1.4% of the total production of beef in the EU. So obviously it cannot, dramatically change anything. And on the contrary, there are a lot of benefits also for the EU in terms of, if we stay in this wine, you mentioned beer, but wine as well, spirits, everything regards cereals as well. So, even for farmers, there's a lot of benefits from the European side. And saying all that, I wanted to, sorry, my conclusion may be a bit provocative, but because I think I have been working now for the past 20 years on environment issues, and I think when we linked environment and business, it looks like it's two polarized worlds. That environment could be like against business or vice versa. And this is not the case. And I want really to explain that for me, environment and everything regarding environment is not a cost, it's an investment for the future. And especially now, nobody doesn't know that there is a climate change and that it affects very much all our economies and all our societies. It's going to floods, wildfires, heavy rain, heavy heat, all these kind of things. So we have to tackle those issues. And so we have, and I'm very happy that there is this mention of the Paris Agreement as an essential clause within the EU trade Mercosur. And I think, and we mentioned a bit earlier as well, the new geopolitical trade climate around here in the world, especially with the new Trump mandate. Definitely, even some countries, some member states that were very much against the EU Mercosur trade agreement, talking about France, for example, they are not anymore. And yesterday, Friedrich Merz mentioned that Emmanuel Macron was agreeing to sign this agreement, considering that due to this change in tariffs and in general this change in the trade war that we mentioned as well, we are seeking for new partners, and definitely Mercosur is one of them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Colombe. And this is a very important topic, this upside-down world in terms of trade and geopolitics. We are another impulsionate the agreement, probably. And so now for you, Mariana, in your position as the leader of FGV offices in Europe, you manage many institutional the contexts and relationships in both private and public sectors. And based on your experience here in Europe, what is your perception, your opinion, on how Brazilian organizations should demonstrate their commitments in terms of environmental issues? Because there's a general perception, as Colombia, in a way or another, on the line, that in Brazil we have problems. But apart from the problems, what we should show to European players in general?
Thank you, Ciro. First of all, I'm here representing Fundação Getúlio Vargas, which is the third largest think tank in the world. And our mission here is to build bridges between Brazil and the world, especially with the European Union, since our headquarters is based here. And we want to position ourselves as a trustworthy, reliable, non-partisan source of data, study, and information from and about Brazil. Said that, I agree with Colombia. What companies can do, and this is not against climate, is quite the opposite. It goes in the same direction. I think, first of all, Brazilian companies should acknowledge the importance of this matter. It's not only environmental and sustainable practices are not only a recommendation or best practices, they are a matter of national strategic intelligence. And with that, I can give you an example. Brazil is already a key supplier of lithium, of copper, of nickel, of platinum to the European Union. And with that, we can help Europe to diversify away from the Russian and the Chinese critical material markets. So we can provide this support. And 30% of these minerals are located in the Amazon region, which goes directly and together with the preservation and the conservation and anti-deforestation measures. In Brazil, we also have over 90% of the niobium reserves of the planet. We have over 20% of the reserves of graphite, 16% of the reserves of nickel, the third largest deposit of critical raw materials. And this is located, as I said, 30% in the legal Amazon area. So ESG measures are, for Brazilian companies, utterly important to present the country and the enterprises as a reliable, as a forward-looking partner, not only for the European Union, but worldwide. And Brazil can boost its export and its competitiveness while safeguarding invaluable resources and environmental assets. So, but not only acknowledge the importance and the relevance of this theme, but also is urgent to take action. So companies should also look for the standards we establish here in Europe, as previously explained, the ones for the Green Deal, as a compass for what they are looking for, what they are trying to reach in order to enable new markets here in Europe. And with that, we have, as discussed before, since 2024, in the EU-Mercosul agreement, we have the so-called mirror clauses, which require imported products to meet the similar quality standards we have here in Europe. And as said, this should be a compass for Brazilian companies. Also, the EU deforestation regulation, which bans imported goods linked to deforestation areas. We have the corporate due diligence, which also oblige EU companies to trace their entire supply chain. So we have a range of legal mechanisms that are taking place to strengthen ESG and compliance and environmental protection and labor rights. And Brazilian companies should orient themselves to this practice in order to enable new markets, especially here in Europe.
Okay, good. So both comments paved the way for introducing Leonardo Fleck, who works for a huge financial organization which supports some projects towards green energy and reforestation. So I want you to not only to give some examples of how your financial institutions support those initiatives, but also most importantly, I want you to explain how this connection can help those organizations supported to build bridges towards European organizations that do believe that that type of engagement is a very important value. And without that very important value, there's no business, there's no partnership. So, long story short, how to build a bridge based on that effort.
The invitation to join this panel, Ciro. This is a subject that is very important for us in Brazil, but not just in Brazil, globally, and also in South America, where we have a very large footprint in many countries. I just wanted to reinforce your first message about COP30. I think COP30 was brought to Brazil and brought also to Belém in the Amazon to showcase all that Brazil can offer to the world in terms of climate solutions in a broad range of sectors, including sustainable foods, nature-based solutions, critical minerals, as Mariana mentioned, and renewable energy, such as hydrogen and biofuels, which I know is a controversial topic, but we are a powerhouse of biofuels production for decades, and there's plenty of opportunity for Brazil to help on that, especially on sustainable aviation fuels. And we mentioned deforestation before, but I think it's also important to highlight that the Brazilian government is doing its homework to reduce deforestation in the country. Last year, it has dropped by half in the Amazon region and by a fourth in the Cerrado biome. So we are making important strides on addressing that important challenge. And in this context, of course, it's very critical that Brazil collaborates more closely with the EU, as Brazil can help the EU also achieve its climate goals through these types of solutions. And we have been partners for a long time, and so there's much to do under the EU Mercosul agreement. As a bank in Santander, we have been working very hard to help our clients achieve their sustainability goals. I will mention 4 ways in which we have been helping them. First, it is important to ensure that we are consistent in our approach to sustainable finance. So we developed a robust sustainable taxonomy, which serves as a classification system to earmark all those transactions that can be deemed green, social, or sustainable. It is inspired in the EU taxonomy, which is very robust, but also includes Santander-specific categories that we consider sustainable based on credible international standards. This system supports our engagement with clients in finding the best financial solutions for their needs. Second, because many climate transition technologies are still new and immature, we have developed a dedicated risk framework in Brazil to cover sustainable innovations such as nature-based solutions and regenerative agriculture. Because these are immature markets, they may require developing new understandings and also custom approaches to risk assessments. Third, our clients may need preferential financing conditions for climate-related transactions. So we have been working closely with governments and development banks to obtain that type of funding, such as the Brazilian government credit line called EcoInvest. Is a large subsidized credit line focused on supporting the decarbonization of the Brazilian economy. And this is a point, I think, that connects with what you mentioned, Ciro. This is investments that we need to make on Brazilian or international businesses operating in Brazil that require raising also funds outside Brazil. So there's plenty of opportunity for us to collaborate with investors in the EU interested in fostering the growth of these sectors and technologies in the country. And we have also worked with the European Investment Bank, also raising funds for solar panels in the country, just to give a couple examples. Finally, we have been very active in the forest restoration space, basically going after degraded lands and putting them back into the regional ecosystems that existed there to ensure that we have carbon sequestration, but also improvements in biodiversity in the country. We have plenty of degraded lands in Brazil. Some estimates show it's more than 100 million hectares in the country. So we co-founded actually a restoration company called Biomas to help with that. And through that company, alongside other shareholders, we aim to restore and protect up to 2 million hectares of degraded lands in 20 years. So in doing so, we expect to help support the growth of high-integrity, nature-based carbon markets in the country. Biomas is actually looking for off-takers for their carbon credits and co-investors for their projects. So this is another point of collaboration and connection, as you mentioned, Ciro, where we actually welcome interested parties from the EU to engage us and join efforts in the restoration of the Amazonian forest through that company.
Okay, thank you, Leonardo. And I want to address all of you a specific question based on the fact that uncertainty and volatility are the new normal worldwide because of all those geopolitical changes, trade changes. So the question is, to what extent all those pressures, all this new reality may impact green movements that have been developed on the last few years. What is the level of threat from this new situation impacting green solutions, or green efforts worldwide, and looking specifically to our Mercosul European Union reality. Colombe?
I can begin shortly, but I must say that I'm very happy to see that we are very much aligned in this panel, and I want to show, indeed, I think this difficult world we are facing at the moment is in fact an opportunity. And I do see it as an opportunity, especially for everything regarding the green transition. You mentioned the carbon credits. We are also developing here in Europe the biodiversity credits, which is also a way to help and to empower, the quality of our planet. And this is absolutely super important. We have indeed, and I think it's mostly an economic chat here today, but I don't think we can just divide and say economy and politics are not the same. So there is, at least here in the European Union, a kind of rise of right and extreme right parties in a few member states. And for a reason, those parties are not fully in favor of a green transition. But everything that we discussed here today and everything that we have seen regarding energy, deforestation, are in fact in favor of the economy and in favor of the citizens. So I do think that in the future we will go through this way, which is the right way for everybody.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I think volatility is define the zeitgeist that we are living in, the spirit of the time. We have seen last week China posting a video of Ronald Reagan defending liberalism, while we are seeing US defending protectionism. So we are kind of in an episode of Twilight Zone, or for my fellows, German X Factor. And this is kind of unusual times, and I think what we have seen the last weeks, and especially with the tariffs and everything, is being a catalyst for the EU-Mercosul agreement. I'm speaking here on behalf of both South American and Europeans, since I'm German and Brazilian, and I think it's my prerogative to speak on behalf of both. And if I may, I wanted to give you especially my fellow Europeans here, a key takeaway, because we have been discussing this agreement the last 25 years, and I think the time is now is urgent. It's an urgent matter for EU to diversify its partners. And just to give you an example, in the 2000s, when we started discussing this, the exports from Brazil to European Union were about 50%, roughly 20 billion. Last year, we had exports around 170 billions, and 40% of this to China, and only 15% to the European Union. So we have seen that Europe has lost a great ground of trade in South America. And we as Europeans, we need to recognize and realize this fact and take action. And I think with the volatility we've seen the last weeks, the time to act is now and to sign the agreement.
Leonardo, your thoughts?
Sure. I would try to take a more of a big picture view. I think it's definitely a blow in the short term on sustainability initiatives, as volatility leads to uncertainty and businesses need minimal predictability to make the large investments required in the climate transition. So the strong signals that we would need now to accelerate scale in the short term are now blurred by noise around what will be the future interest rates and inflation, and how tariffs and global supply chains will behave. But the long-term signal is very clear. I don't see the direction changing by any means. The competitiveness of clean technologies is increasing, and it's key for them to navigate turbulent political times. This aligns, of course, with the messaging from the EU on the need for focus, more focus on competitiveness of clean technologies. And companies are making money with the transition. Innovations are accelerating exponentially on certain sectors and products like solar, electric vehicles, batteries, and they will continue to grow. But continuing to increase scale is obviously necessary, as clean tech costs fall by around 20% for every doubling in deployment. Because of that, we have seen a major drop in cost of up to 80% in some of these technologies over the last decade, and that is massive. For some geographies, we also see that solar and wind power are already more competitive than oil and gas. So I think for some of the climate tech, they are going to be relatively unaffected or marginally affected by political turmoil. And we are not even talking about the impact that AI will have on further accelerating these transitions, including further reducing costs for these technologies and also improving the value proposition. For example, the International Energy Agency has found that applying AI to power plant operations globally could yield up to $110 billion in annual cost savings by 2035 through efficiency gains, avoided fuel and maintenance expenses. And there are many other examples like that. NVIDIA, for example, and Google, through their DeepMind initiative, they have been developing AI-powered models to forecast climate and weather with a much higher granularity, and that will definitely help to optimize, for example, solar and wind power generation.
Okay, thank you. And I want to address you, again, all of you, a final, let's say, provocation. Boycott is a word very well known here in Europe. And boycott against companies, they occur whenever people, consumers, disagree on certain attitudes and behaviors from the corporate side. So we are seeing a very good example now. Tesla sold 37 less cars in Europe in the first quarter. So my question, for very short questions from all of you, is what kind of specific credentials, I don't mean speeches, credentials, concrete credentials that Mercosul brands and companies must be prepared to show in the European market in order to prove that they walk the talk?
Very fast. I think sustainability, definitely. I mean, coping with the environment. This is definitely a trend here in the EU, and that would be, very important.
Sure, it kind of circles back to my previous answer, but I think beyond compliance, demonstrating strong environmental values, because this can be a competitive edge here in Europe. Both consumers, producers, investors, they place a lot of value in products and supply chains that are traceable. So I think for the Brazilian companies in Mercosul, they can definitely take advantage of this.
I would say that we need to agree on standards, right? Especially for financial institutions. The EU, as I mentioned before, has a taxonomy to classify green projects. Brazil is developing its own. Hopefully, it will be launched into COP30. We have our own. So it's really important that every Mercosur country develops their own taxonomies and that local companies support their development. And it's also key that both Mercosur countries and the EU taxonomies become interoperable so as to avoid and do complexity and risks as we expand our trade relationships.
Okay, thank you. I want to very deep conversation. It's a shame that we have no time to go on. So I want to thank you all, Leonardo in Brazil, Mariana in Colombia, and I hope we have new opportunities in the near future, to discuss this topic more deeply. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we will be running a second panel, which is focused on government procurement. And for that, I want to invite to join me Mr. John Basil, Director of International Policy and Regional Affairs at the European Commission, DG for Trade. Welber Barral in Brazil, in Brasilia now. He's a former Secretary of Foreign Trade for the Brazilian government. And on the last few years, he has been running his own consultancy firm, BMJ Government Relations and International Trade, working globally in different geographies. And Oscar Guinea, a senior economist at the European Center for International Political Economy, ECIP, based in Brussels. The think tank is based in Brussels. And Oscar came from Spain, especially for this seminar. Again, thank you for that, Oscar. During the negotiation process of framing the EU-Mercosul agreement, one topic did not stand on the spotlight, such as other matters such as sustainability and agribusiness. Despite its limited visibility, or at least public visibility, the topic government procurement generated significant debates before reaching a common ground, let's say that. And this is very easy to understand, because when we talk about government purchase, we are talking about big purchase, very expensive expenses. So that's why this topic remains very, very important. It's one of the most important pillars of the free trade agreement. So I want to start to asking Mr. John Basil. about the following topic. You have been connected to Latin America reality and many trade negotiations for many years. So based in your experience, which gives you a, let's say, a helicopter view, in what extent the agreement will influence governments in both sides of the Atlantic when framing future bids, purchase and deals? What will be the impact?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me and for this opportunity for us all to have this conversation. I think they're necessary and many more are needed. And yes, it's a topic which hasn't hit the headlines. It's seen as quite a technical thing, public procurement and so on. But if you think that it represents, for both Mercosur and the EU, I saw figures of around 14% of GDP is spent in public procurement by governments. And that, for the EU, means about 2,000 billion, so 2 trillion euros. It's a number I can't really understand. But for Mercosur, 300 billion. So this is big money that we're talking about, and how it's spent is important. And of course, it's our money, it's taxpayers' money, so we care about it as well, how it's spent. And for governments, it's also a tool they can use to influence policy. So there's quite a lot of dynamics going into this whole area, which, when you read the text of the agreement, is quite dry and so on. I think for the EU, the question was what changes, in a way, what impact this agreement will make. I think for the EU, we have a relatively open public procurement market. It's also been opened up for other trade partners, so procedures in terms of transparency and so on are already largely there. And Mercosur countries at present have fairly good access to these markets. But the question is, what about the future? Because they have no guarantee that this will remain the case. And in fact, recently the EU adopted a new instrument called the International Procurement Instrument, which means that if a complaint is made about access to a third country's market by a European company, then after a certain process, its access to the EU market can be constrained somehow, not banned, but made more difficult. But what's interesting is that if there's a trade agreement, if these goods, services, contracts are covered by a trade agreement, then they're not subject to the international procurement instrument. So in other words, what this does is it gives legal certainty for Mercosur companies that they'll be able to invest, in being able to bid for contracts in Europe. And then I think from the perspective of Mercosur, I would say that what it has achieved is a gradual opening up of public procurement markets, which is a bit in line with the overall objective of the agreement, which is a gradual opening up of the market. And on the one hand, at least with regard to Brazil, the geographic scope is quite broad. It goes beyond federal spending to include many of the Brazilian states, and as we know, Brazilian states are big, important. They spend a lot of money. But on the other hand, it does still allow for there's a certain phasing in of the amounts, the bids for which European companies can tender, and the exemptions for some sectors, including the public health sector, as well as it still allows the ability to maintain what we call margins of preference, so some type of bonus for domestic companies in the bids. So it's like all good negotiations, it's a compromise. Neither side is completely happy, but both sides gain something. So that's kind of looking at it from the, you might say, the commercial perspective. But I think another important point, which is another thing that makes this topic interesting, is that the provisions on transparency, fairness of procedures, and, for instance, requirement to have processes, so if somebody loses a tender, they can have recourse for it to be reviewed and so on. All these things have an important role because they're all ways to reduce corruption. And that means increasing the efficiency of government spending, but also increasing the trust of citizens in their institutions. So by hardwiring these provisions into this international agreement, even if we're content with procedures as they are, I think we're all aware that in this changing world, this gives also a certainty for the future that the taxpayers' money will be spent in a transparent way, and that businesses will be able to access these markets without sort of behind-the-scenes favoritism, and so that their investment in the bids is not wasted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now I want to listen to Welber Barral. Barral, you served for many years as Foreign Trade Secretary of the Brazilian government. Now you run your own global consultancy firm. So you know well both sides of the counter. So my question is, how positive you feel that this free trade agreement can be for Brazil in terms of government procurement, remembering that, as Mr. Basil underlined, that this, we are not talking just about federal government, but always regional governments. So how positive it can be to Brazilian governments?
Yes, now I can speak. Yeah. Well, first of all, good morning to you all. Ciro, thanks for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. Hopefully you'll be physically present next time. This is a great question, and we have to take into account the impact of the public procurement chapter in the agreement. I know it's not one of the most sexy chapters, considering everything that has been discussed in the agreement, but it has a huge impact, not only in terms of integration on both sides, opportunities for companies on both sides, but also, as Mr. Basil has mentioned, also the principles like transparency, the right to appeal, the right to access to documents, and is really a baseline for access to public procurement. And then I have some comments about this chapter. First of all, it was one of the key chapters in the negotiation. In the final round, we had two big issues. One was sustainable development, and the other was public procurement. Mostly because the current Brazilian administration thinks that public procurement can be a source, a mechanism for public policy, especially in some sensitive sectors like health, for example. You know that Brazil is one of the biggest buyers of pharmaceuticals in the world, the federal government, thanks to our unified and public health system. Besides that, there are other exceptions that are very common in other agreements, such as excluding the defense sector, excluding some sensitive sectors like the internal communications of the government. And then you have some very regular exceptions like the lease of buildings and things like this. So first of all, it has a very big coverage, except for health. In the case of Brazil, in the case of other countries, you have also more coverage on the health sector. But you have all these opportunities. Besides, you have the most of all legal certainty. The very fact, Ciro, is that in practice, and we work for many European companies that provide the Brazilian purchases, the federal government purchases, and most of these companies, they simply create a company locally to be responsible for the delivery, or they have a local partner in terms of selling to the Brazilian government. The agreement reduces these costs, these transaction costs, and it brings legal security. It brings the principles that are going to be applied not only in Brazil, but also for the access of Brazilian companies in the European purchases. And it gives really a baseline that has to be followed. You don't have to go through jeitinho or other mechanisms to participate in tenders here. A final comment is that this agreement, besides having been very negotiated during the agreement, during the Mercosul-UE negotiations, it's also important in terms of being the first agreement that covers public procurement for Mercosul countries. We have a regional agreement that is not so complete as this chapter of the European Union, and neither of the Mercosul countries participates in the WTO procurement agreement. So it's really a very important step in terms of creating a precedent to open public procurement for new competitors and for a new trading partner.
Thank you, Bahal. Oscar Guinea, I will start by reading a paragraph of a robust survey you wrote 4 years ago. And this paragraph said, European Union companies have traditionally won public contracts in Mercosur, implementing projects of considerable size. Recently, however, EU companies have faced stiff competition from Chinese firms, which have won a growing number of public contracts. In this context, the agreement with Mercosul will provide EU companies with a fair, non-discriminatory, and transparent access to Mercosul public procurement markets, which will help EU businesses in their biddings to win public contracts in the region. My question is, still on track to see that? You still endorse your own words from 4 years ago? Something changed in your views?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Ciro, for the invitation to this event. Yeah, I wrote this in 2021, which seems like a long time ago, but since we have been talking about this agreement since the last 25 years, it's relatively not that long ago, or not such a long old paper. I'll try my best to answer your question, although the remarks by Joel and Wilmer were very good, so I don't know much what I'm going to contribute to. But if there is something that I think the two last speakers and I agree on, is that the reason why I think what I wrote in 2021 is still true is that the agreement provides legal certainty. And for EU and Mercosur companies to sell goods and services to each other's market. And what Donald Trump has done is something extraordinary, and I think it's something he didn't try to, which is to increase the value of free trade agreements, such as the EU-Mercosur Association Agreement. Because when something is scarce, it's increasing value. And the situation that we face at the moment, where access to foreign markets can change in a whim with a decision by the executive, with total disregard to international rules, it has increased the value of the EU-Mercosur Association Agreement. This is a situation where neither the EU nor Mercosur countries are comfortable. So what the chapter in government procurement, what it does is that it locks the market access to each other's market. So, and this provides certainty to businesses when they have to plan and set up strategies for the long term. The second point I want to make in the reference to what I wrote in 2021 is that, yes, the situation that we have is that the EU companies play a substantial role in public procurement in Mercosur and in Brazil, but they have been facing increased competition from China. So in a way, this kind of the fact that European companies have access to public procurement markets in conditions which are relatively more favorable than Chinese companies have, it's a win for the EU. And the third point is I have to probably reduce the expectations a little bit in terms of just set the expectations on public procurement, because on one, it's a strange kind of market, because on one hand, it's really big. So the figures that you mentioned, which are difficult to comprehend, like 2 trillion or 800 billion, when you compare that with what the EU and Brazil trade bilaterally, which is 84 billion. The government procurement is a very big market, but it is a market that suffers from very strong home bias. So in terms of the percentage of foreign bidders and foreign winners of public procurement, it's relatively small. It's 5.3% for the EU, 3.7% for Brazil. And something that John has alluded is the fact that the government procurement chapter includes limitations, which were negotiated by the EU and negotiated by the Mercosur, limitations on what is covered in terms of health, in terms of defense, limits to the contract value, and the preference that each of the governments can give to SMEs. But I want to end my answer to this question with a positive note, which is going back to the beginning. We have a government procurement market which is very big. And access to each other is not necessarily large because it has a home bias which is strong, but we have what the agreement does is provides the fundamentals for long-term investment, which is legal certainty. We have a profitable market, we have clear rules that will not change, and we also have the knowledge that the rules also leads to non-discrimination between foreign bidders and domestic bidders, which is the ingredients that companies need to do the long-term investments and also to lead to more economic integration between the two regions.
Okay, one question, that I want a comment from, sorry, all of you. During the negotiations in this chapter, government procurement, Mercosul presented the argument that public policies in crucial areas as health, as mentioned by Bahal, industrial development, innovation, should be taken into consideration in order to get the final document. And some voices in Mercosul always suggested that those public policies could be an instrument for economic and industrial advancement in both regions, in both sides of the Atlantic. This way opening the doors for preferences for national producers, providers. So the question is, this kind of window, let's say, to grant an additional layer of competitiveness to local providers, local producers, is this a good suggestion, a good way to go? Is fair enough? Is strategically correct? That's the provocation.
Okay. I'll have a quick shot at answering, though I'm not an economist, but that sometimes is an advantage, I think. I think, well, the governments have to balance a number of objectives, and one sort of overarching one is to get value for money for the bid for which is for the citizens, and the best service for the best price. But of course there are other objectives, and one which I think the taxpayers very much relate to is if it's our taxes, it should be spent on our companies. Also in the EU, we have other objectives, like if there's a greener solution, we can maybe give it a bit of a preference in the bid and so on, even if it's a bit more expensive and so on. So we use the procurement policy also to implement other policies. But of course, it's a question of balance, because if we are helping local companies but not weaning them off this support, then they remain dependent on these markets, but not competitive in the broader market, or especially in the international market. So we have to be careful not to be basically helping them, but they're not developing and becoming competitive. And of course, that again is part of the reason we have this whole agreement. And then the other consideration is that sometimes you just want the best service because of the knock-on benefits. So if you give a concession for an airport terminal to an experienced international company and they manage it well, it's a pleasant experience, then you have more tourists and there are other benefits. If you have a railway with the most up-to-date signaling equipment, you have less delays for freight, less costs. So there are other broader benefits beyond the tender itself, which can result from being a bit more rigorous in and not just helping the local producer.
Bahal, your thoughts?
Ciro, I think that the answer is it depends. It depends because, of course, the government should look for cheaper products and services, should make it more effective in terms of using the taxpayer money. However, you have some situations, and I think I have 3 comments. First of all, it's not a solution as the current Brazilian government expects. In other words, there is a lot of expectation that public procurement could be used as a tool for industrial development and for industrial policy. And I don't believe even the fiscal situation in Brazil can allow that. So there are more expectations than reasonable outcomes from this policy. On the other hand, you may have some situations, some sectors in which some restrictions or local preferences could be justified. The first one clearly is defense. Brazil already has some preferences for purchasing of defense in Brazil. Brazil doesn't spend much on defense. It's a country that doesn't feel threatened. But the very fact is that some of this research, investment in local companies, although they are smaller, can be useful in terms of spin-off to other industrial utilities. So one first exception, I think, is defense. If the money is directed to innovation, is directed to really efficient use. The second situation is health. And this is a very particular situation of Brazil. Because Brazil has a public and general health system, and the federal government purchases a lot of health products, then you may have some interesting projects that it's called PPB as the name of the local production incentives, which attracts the production of pharmaceuticals in Brazil and guarantees its future purchase by our Ministry of Health. This system has been very useful in terms of nationalizing products and pharmaceuticals that Brazil uses a lot. So, and grants general access to the population. So maybe the answer is this. Normally, I would say that it's the expectation of using public procurement for development is fruitless. But there are some exceptions in which we can see some good results.
Thank you. Oscar.
Yeah, I am an economist, so I'm apologize beforehand. And I think this is, the remarks, it kind of shows that this agreement has also been well negotiated from Brazil, because defense and health are two areas which are excluded. So in that case, both sides have to kind of find a compromise. From my point of view, a more kind of conceptual point of view, I think the exceptions to government procurement, what they do is that they lower the benefits to citizens, in the sense that what the benefits of this kind of agreement is the competition that it brings, which leads to lower prices and better quality for public services on sectors which are fundamental for the well-functioning of the economy and for the life of citizens, transport, telecommunication services, health equipment, etc. So I understand that from the point of view of the Brazilian government, public procurement is seen as an industrial policy, but there are many ways to do industrial policy, and direct support for companies is just one of them, and not necessarily the most successful. My argument is that the economic effects of having the best public services or the best transport infrastructure outweighs the benefits from supporting a certain local company. And I will argue this for any economy in the world. So trying to go back to a kind of a previous question, a more fundamental question for me, and trying to link that question with government procurement, is what is one of the benefits that Brazil gets from the agreement? And to me, one of the benefits is that is higher levels of investments that will help Brazil to continue modernizing its economy. So the question is, how can public procurement contribute to that modernization of the Brazilian economy? And to me, the answer to that question is that it's through the establishment of European companies that invest in Brazil for the delivery of public procurement goods and services. And what do these companies need? And going back to the first answer, is that they need the certainty that if they establish themselves in Brazil, they will be treated in the same way as domestic companies. And if they invest in Brazil, they will integrate with local supplies, and they will also bring the knowledge spillovers that will also benefit the Brazilian economy as a whole. And the same goes absolutely for Brazilian companies investing in European companies. I mean, we have, on the previous speaker was from Santander, which is a Spanish bank. I would love to have Novo Bank in Europe and in Spain as well, increasing competition and delivering good services.
Okay. We have in this panel one think tank, one consultancy firm, and one official body. So my question to those three different players is, what is your perspective? Where, in terms of ratification process of the free trade agreement, do you foresee more stronger scrutiny in the European Council or in the European Parliament? And how optimistic you are about the agreement being really approved and ratified?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the scrutiny, one might imagine that the Parliament takes a more political approach and the governments, member state governments in Council, more technical. But from what we've seen so far, we're getting lots of technical questions from the Parliament. So, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's that way in terms of the rigor of the scrutiny. But I think what the biggest difference will be is in the diversity and visibility of opinions, where, of course, a government to have an opinion in the Council here in Brussels goes through quite a complex internal process of consulting different ministries, and if it has a coalition, different parties, to come to a certain position. Whereas, of course, members of parliament in the European Parliament, just as in the Brazilian Congress, are very happy to give their opinion following the party line in most cases, but sometimes just giving their opinion. So we're going to have more noise, you might say, from the European Parliament because of this diversity of opinion. But of course, the level of scrutiny will be large, and I think one risk that some of us have in being in Brussels, what we call the Brussels bubble, is that this is also a debate that is going on in each of the member states and being played out in different ways with their own political dynamics.
Bahal, your views?
Yeah, so one first comment, just adding to what Oscar said, I think the main achievement of this chapter is really legal security. In the case of Brazil, we have a clause in the Brazilian constitution that equals foreign and local investors. So that's a high level guarantee that can be more specified now in the chapter. There are some exceptions for small and medium companies, but this is below the threshold of the purchases that are defined in the chapter on public procurement. But coming back to your question, so I see clearly two factors or 2 points of pressure. On one side, the lobby from the European agricultural sector is still very strong. And of course, this is the main objection that we may have to the agreement. We all know that. On the other hand, I think the international scenario has changed. And this is time for Europe to lead, especially the maintenance of the global trading system that has been challenged by the current US administration. So from this side of the Atlantic, I think there is full support for the agreement. The 4 countries are completely aligned to the support in the agreement. The pending issue, as always, is agriculture. So my final answer is that I'm cautiously optimistic, but recognizing that we have all this work to be done.
Yes, one of the benefits of being from a think tank is that I can be less diplomatic and more direct, which I think is a real privilege, because in a way I completely agree with the other speakers. I think until now the most difficult part has been in the Council, and the reason why I argue that is that the agreement has not passed the Council. But the level of scrutiny will be different, and here I agree completely with John in the sense that what we are going to have is a much more open discussion. When, let's assume that the agreement is passed in the Council and it moves to the Parliament, what we will have in the Parliament is a much more open debate. And I think in this debate, what we need is those who are in favor of the agreement from both sides of the Atlantic to be vocal, because otherwise it will be hijacked by the extremes which do not like the agreement, and we will not hesitate to use half-truth in order to discredit it, and when to discredit the agreement, they might also discredit Brazilian businesses, Brazilian business practices, Brazilian products. And I think the debate could be nasty even for some, and some MEPs might only care about their constituents and not about the bigger picture, may actually be rude, and this is not acceptable. And that's the reason why we need to speak all in favor of the agreement, or to bring balance. And this is not relatively easy, but this can be done because the agreement brings clear benefits, and there are safeguards and it's balanced. but the agreement will not speak for itself. And we need champions, we need people to talk about the evidence base behind the agreement and confront those who are against it with the facts, so we have a more rational, evidence-based discussion. So at the same time, I would like to finish with this, that the agreement has been in the works for 20 years, for 25 years. So some will say, well, what's the rush? I mean, let's wait. And it's been longer than Gardel's tango, right? 20 years. Yeah. But I think there is a window of opportunity now. I cannot think of a better time to support the agreement. And let me finish with a quote from my favorite Brazilian song from Cazuza, O Tempo Não Para. So I think there's a great time now to support the agreement.
Okay, so I want to thank you all, Velbert Barral from Brazil, John Basil, and Oscar Guinea, who came from Spain for the seminar. And I will pass the floor for my colleague Lucila Ribeiro, who will be running the next two panels on agribusiness and industry and services. I'll come back to the wrap-up session at the end, and thank you for the moment.
Welcome everyone. My name is Lucila Ribeiro and I'm going to mediate the next two panels. First of all, I would like to greet and thank our guests today on the panel. So Mr. Lucas Ferraz, who is joining us from Brazil, Head of Center of Global Business Studies from Fundação Getúlio Vargas and former Trade Secretary. Mr. Stefan Pinter, Head of Public Policy and member of the EMEA management team at Suzano, the largest pulp manufacturer in the world and one of the largest paper producers in Latin America. He's based in Vienna and kindly joined us here in Brussels to take part on our event. Mr. Stephen Wilkham, thank you. He's a risk management, compliance and emerging markets consultant based in Frankfurt. Thank you, Mr. Stephen Wilkham, for joining us here in Brussels as well. Well, I'm very glad to be here. Thanks, Ciro, for the invitation. And we are going to talk about industry and services. Well, at the end of last year, the Brazilian government, during the signing of the agreement, estimated the growth in exports of services and manufactured goods to the UE could reach a double-digit growth respectively 15 and 27%, which means a lot for Brazil and the other Mercosur countries. At the same time, the agreement may create a very good opportunities for the European companies, as will eliminate often prohibitive custom tariffs on exports to Mercosur, generating an avoided cost of around 4 billion euros. And only custom tariffs, because probably some other synergies can be reached in the next years. So I would start by addressing a question to Mr. Lucas Ferraz. Please, Lucas. You have been connected to trade negotiations in the academic and political fields. My question for you is, based on your experience, what are the main advantages for the industry and services on both sides?
So first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. I'd like to greet my panel colleagues as well. Well, I think I can say perhaps a few words about this agreement from the perspective of a former negotiator of this agreement. I am a former Secretary of Foreign Trade, so in 2019, it was the year when this agreement was for the first time announced. I mean, the conclusion of the negotiations were for the first time announced in more than 20 years. So I'm familiar with some of the details of this agreement, so I will try to delve deeper a little bit on some of the main highlights, benefits, especially when it comes to the Brazilian economy. First of all, I think it's important to say that we are talking about one of the largest trade agreements so far in the global economy. This agreement has a combined GDP of nearly $22 trillion in both regions, and also it will form a consumer market of nearly 720 million people. Needless to say, the EU is Brazil's second largest trade partner. Last year, we exported $48 billion to the European market, and we imported $47 billion. The agreement has a very ambitious offer, both in industrial goods and also in agricultural goods. In the case of industrial goods, 81% of tariff lines will be liberalized in 10 years in the case of Brazil, and 10% in 50 years. When it comes to Europe, trade liberalization in industrial goods will be basically, tariffs will basically go to zero immediately, as soon as the agreement take force. For the agricultural goods, of course, it has it's a little bit less ambition than for industrial goods, as one might expect. But anyway, the European Union has made an offer covering nearly 90% of tariff lines with quotas. And in the case of Brazil, we have an offer of 2% of tariff lines corresponding to quotas. So a less ambitious offer from the European sides and a little bit more ambitious offer from the Brazilian side, just the opposite of the industrial goods negotiations, as one might expect. Nevertheless, I would say that the EU has given a larger market access in several commodities that are important for the Brazilian economy, like sugar, like ethanol, like beef, poultry, orange juice, coffee, and many others. When it comes to services, we also have provisions covering the 4 modes of services trade, including national treatment and market access. It's also important to highlight that there was a huge advancement, and it was a very complex negotiations when it comes to cabotage services. So for the first time, with this agreement, the European vessels will have the permission to operate in Mercosur maritime transportation when it comes to transportation done by containers. We have also important provisions covering intellectual property, with some geographic indications being formalized from both sides, and also, I would say, an important provision for digital trade, with a commitment of not imposing customs duties on electronic transmissions. When it comes to the benefits, to the estimated benefits for this agreement, from our side, we estimate that this agreement has the potential to increase Brazil's exports and imports on more than $200 billion in 15 years, and also to attract nearly $100 billion in terms of new investments in our economy. So in the end, we hope this agreement may work as a signal for other potential trade partners that might be interested in future negotiations with Brazil, especially when we consider the very complex global scenario that we have been going through over the last years. I'll stop here.
Great. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Mr. Lucas Ferraz. Mr. Stephen, welcome. I would like to bring you to the discussion. Lucas commented a lot about the benefits that the trade agreement may happened. But at the same time, looking to emerging markets, a topic that you have a relevant experience, what are the main challenges that companies from Mercosul face in the European Union and vice versa? Can you comment on that?
Thank you, Lucilla. Gladly I can comment on the challenges because as a former risk manager, I dealt all my life with challenges.
Oh, I too. It's very important.
And I actually met my wife while I was in risk management as well. So there we closed the circle. But before I do that, I would also like to congratulate everyone here in the room and also listening to us, hopefully online, because you've been listening to us for over 2 hours now. So thank you for that. But I really enjoyed the discussion because, as one of my predecessors here on the panel said, I think it's really important to be candid and open and also talk about the challenges. So when I speak to clients looking from Brazil to Europe, what I often hear is what Colombe and Mariana commented on, which is the complexity of regulation, the scrutiny and the detailed regulation around sustainability, protection of the environment, labor laws, which in each region and each state are different, and last but not least, the requirements around the quality of the supply chain. And to just illustrate the complexity, I'll just translate the requirements of the supply chain law into German. There's one German word, Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz. It's one word, it's not a sentence. So this illustrates the complexity that our friends from Brazil sometimes face when they look at the European market as a whole. Now, this will not disappear, this challenge, but as we've discussed before, that also provides opportunities for Brazilian companies here. The other challenge that I hear, having worked in banking for many decades, is very often Brazilian companies coming to Europe face challenges around financing. And usually many projects, for example, on sustainable fuels or green hydrogen, they basically start with a project, with an idea, then they go into seed funding, then they go into equity and a sort of bank funding. And these various stages, there are products, but it's not a consistent sort of pool of products that is available. It's not easy to find investors for some of these projects. So that's the sort of Brazilian view on Europe. Looking the other side, European companies looking to invest in South America and in particular in Brazil, many have a lot of respect for the vastness of the territory and the fact that it's not one country in a way, Brazil. It's many regions, a lot of states have different cultures, different expectations. And therefore, what I can see when I speak to German clients, European clients trying to invest in Brazil, there's actually a dichotomy. So I would say half of them tend to be very cautious. They don't even know where to start. They don't have a local network. Many don't have in their own company, which tend to be mid-cap, Mittelstand in Germany companies, which make up 99% in terms of number of companies in Germany. They don't even know where to start. They don't even have someone who speaks Portuguese, knows the culture, knows the country. And therefore, basically give up right at the beginning. The other extreme, they tend to be more optimistic. And many European companies are global leaders in their industry. And that means that they have really good products and they assume that this excellent product, and we talked about beer before, I don't know why, but let's talk about beer again. So let's say you are a German company producing beer and you're very successful in your home market, and then you assume, well, the Brazilians will like my beer too, so I'll just export it. Now, the problem that you will find is that taste, obviously, is different in every culture, and German beer, some types of German beer are too bitter for Brazilians, for example. So you need to adjust, you need to listen to your consumers, you need to understand your market, and not be too optimistic. So to summarize, some of these obstacles will be removed by the Mercosul agreement in terms of better market access. There's also a wonderful initiative around reduction of bureaucracy and regulation at the European Union level, which was announced recently. So there are things that will get better, but we should not forget about the challenges either.
Good, thank you, Stefan. Well, we also have a real case of a Brazilian company operating for a long time in Europe and very successful. So I would like to make a question to Stefan, Mr. Stefan Pinter. Well, you work for a global company, leader in pulp and paper sector, and you have, as I said, a relevant presence in the European Union. I was wondering, how have you been preparing for the EU and Mercosul agreement? Can you tell us that?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. I'm really proud to represent here Suzano. Suzano is the world's biggest producer of market pulp, of hardwood pulp, produced in Brazil and exported to the whole world, so also to Europe. Europe is our second biggest market, and I can give you a lot of numbers. We talked about a lot of numbers. I like to give one number. Wherever you go in Europe, if you go to Paris, if you go to Rome, if you go to Berlin, for example, and take a napkin, you take 3 napkins. One of the 3 napkins is from my company. So it's maybe not ultimately produced a napkin, but we provide the pulp to the European partners who then produce the final goods. So we have been active and have been working with European partners for decades. So we are not directly impacted by the EU-Mercosur agreement because there are no tariffs on pulp and paper. But we've been heavily promoting as a company, and also myself, because we firmly believe, also looking at the sustainability protocol, that the collaboration in this field of sustainability is vital between the two parts. And I'm kind of also the living proof sitting here representing a Brazilian company in Europe, providing this information to European stakeholders, because there's a lot of talking and there's a huge kind of narrative building in Europe about Brazilian companies, how they do their business. And to be diplomatic, not all of it is true. So I think the advice that I would like to give to Brazilian companies is really being present, knowing the markets, knowing the stakeholders, being part of the discussions, especially here in Brussels. So I spend a lot of time here in Brussels. I used to work in the EU institutions. I'm representing the company. There's a lot of regulatory dossiers, like Mr. Wilken mentioned before, on the table. And I understand that the reflex sometimes from South America, or Mercosul in general, is more, oh, what is the EU doing there? We don't like that. I can give you a lot of examples where it's actually an advantage for us as a company to have European regulation. And one very good example is the deforestation-free regulation, where you have to prove that you produce your pulp, your plantations, it's deforestation and forest degradation free, and we can do that. And there are a lot of other companies and countries in the world from other regions, also in Europe, that can't. So we have actually a competitive advantage through this regulation. Of course, first of all, it brings a burden, it brings more, you need to build up resources, but my company has perfectly understood that you need these local resources, you need the local expertise on the ground to understand that and to interact with the relevant stakeholders and also to inform them. Because I've been working in the parliament myself, so I've been on the other side. And what European legislators are always very keen on is to get information from industries. What is really, what is the impact for them? Then they can build up their own opinions. Of course, it has to be very clear and objective information, and maybe you don't always agree on every part of it, but they need this information. And I think Susano is a perfect example, has understood that you have to firsthand provide this information to the relevant stakeholders in order to enter into a discussion with them.
Wonderful, thank you. So, Mr. Stephen Wilken, how are the European Union companies preparing themselves for the agreement?
The first thing that is a good development is because of the geopolitical developments that some of my fellow panelists discussed before, around the diversification of European companies away from China, for example, or Russia. The volatility, let's say, around the US economic policy. And the fact that Europe itself, in terms of the GDP growth that is projected, depending on the country, goes for the next years, something between 0.5% and 1.5%, so very limited growth. It's a natural thing for European companies to think about the Mercosur area as a wonderful area to invest in. The second, so that's a good start. Now, the Mercosur agreement having been signed recently and now being ratified, I have no doubt, basically brings this back onto the table for European companies. And what many people are doing now, usually family-owned businesses, they basically take a very close look at the details of the agreement. But they also tend, and that's right and correct, they tend to take a broader and a wider look at this, because you shouldn't just invest because of the Mercosur agreement. You should really take a long-term view. And so in my discussions with clients, they start exactly now to say, do I really understand the market in the Mercosur area? How does the logistics look like? How's the will the funding look like? Which risks will I face? And they're doing this hard work at the moment with a long-term view, and I think that's exactly right.
Right, thank you. Mr. Stephen Pinter, what do you suggest when you look at the Brazilian companies, how they could increase the commercial footprint in Europe based on your experience? What should be the to-do list for Brazilian companies, considering the scenario we have now?
Well, I think a lot has already been mentioned by myself or Mr. Wilken. I mean, know your market, know your customers, what kind of need they have. I'm very proud to say that Susano is a very customer-centric company. So you really have to understand, and it's a more complex market than others, maybe. I'm European, I'm a proud European, but we are not the United States of Europe. So like you mentioned before, Not yet, maybe we will be there someday, but we have different law regimes, we have EU regulations, EU directives that are differently transposed or interpreted in different countries. So it's a complex market, you have to deal with it. And you have to deal with it from within with a local expertise. But I think on the other hand, the gains are very obvious. It's the rule of law, which is a fundamental principle in Europe, which, as we can see worldwide, is becoming something kind of a questionable thing. If that's going to be always the same thing in the future, so you can really rely on your partners in Europe. And I think all the investments that you make, and Suzano is making more and more investments in Europe. We have been doing M&A activities. We have a joint venture in Finland. We have an M&A in Austria, actually, a world-leading company producing textile fiber from wood-based materials. So I think the direction is very clear, but you really have to believe also in the market, and you have to build up this local expertise. Also like Suzano, because Suzano a couple of years ago was a sales office with 6-7 sales guys selling pulp and paper in Europe, and it was fine back then. But things have changed, and I think in order to get these benefits, you really have to have a more integrated approach as a company and not only doing sales activities in Europe.
Good, thank you. Mr. Lucas Ferraz, there is something about innovation in the trade agreement that might be very interesting for our participants. Can you comment on the innovation gains that the Brazilian industry can have with the agreement as the production chains will be more integrated? We cannot hear you.
Sorry. Yes, I think from the Brazilian side, since you take into consideration that, especially in the industrial sector, Brazil still has one of the highest import tariffs in the world. Of course, this will mean, a very, let's say, a boost in terms of bilateral trade in industrial goods between the two regions. The European Union, of course, is a significant source of more sophisticated and high-tech goods, and with this, let's say, strengthen, stronger trade flows between our two regions, this will impact positively the productivity of the industrial sector in Brazil, and it will, of course, help to integrate the Brazilian production sector into international value chains involving European companies. Brazil and the South Cone in general is a region that is relatively isolated from global supply chains, which is not the case, of course, of the European Union. So in this sense, I believe that this agreement will bring significant benefits for Mercosul and Brazil in particular, in terms of its the competitiveness of its industrial sector. When it comes to, let's say, the climate change and energy transitions and so on, which of course is a very important agenda, of course, for the European countries. The region here, Latin America and Brazil in particular, is very abundant when it comes to critical minerals and biomass. So Brazil has natural comparative advantages in several important inputs that are, let's say, necessary, to foster the energy transition in the European Union. So I believe that in this case, the Europeans, of course, they will also benefit in this sector with this kind of integration involving critical minerals and biomass. Just in the state of São Paulo, it's important to mention, we are a huge source of ethanol, huge producer of ethanol here in the state of São Paulo. And from ethanol, you can produce several biofuels and bioenergy. You can produce biogas, you can produce the sustainable aviation fuel, you can produce biomethane, so you can produce lots of inputs that are really important to speed up the energy transition, both in Europe and also in our region. Just a few comments about how hard it is to do business in Brazil and in the region because of the bureaucracy, because of the lack of information. Well, I think this is true. I think Brazil still has some job to do, you know, in this regard. A few weeks ago, I was in Chile, and I got really surprised when Chilean authorities mentioned that they have more than 51 agencies, trade promotion and investment agencies abroad, and just to promote and to explain to foreign investors the opportunities that they have, that they might find in Chile. I think Brazil is, far behind, in this regard. Brazil has to do a better job, opening new agencies abroad, trying to, let's say, fight or trying to curb this lack of information. As the economists say, they say asymmetry of information. So there's a lot of asymmetry of information, in this regard. And last, of course, we have the European carbon market, which is very important, as a policy tool to speed up the energy transition in the continent. And it's fair enough to mention that Brazil has also approved our carbon market a few months ago. And in order for this agreement, to potentialize the benefits, of this agreement, especially in the case of the energy transition, I think it's very important, to work on the fungibility of those two markets in order to, let's say, potentialize the benefits also in this field.
Thank you. Since we are running out of time, I would like to give you 2 minutes for each panelist for the final thoughts. So we can start with Mr. Stephen Wilkham, please.
Sure, thank you for that opportunity. And I would just like to to end on a positive note, on an encouraging note. So we should look beyond the complications of the agreement or the complications of regulation and look at the opportunities. And I like very much what Stefan said earlier, for example, in a world where global institutions, the reputation or the credibility of those institutions erodes, it's really important to have partners and talk to people on the ground who've done this before, to talk to people, all of people who have been on these panels today and are really into the details of this. Look at what other companies have done on both sides. Look from the Brazilian side into Europe, look at Suzano, look at Vergis, look at Embraer. And in the other direction, you find European, German companies who've been operating in Brazil, like BASF, BASF, as we call them in Brazil, have been operating for over 150 years in Brazil. So if you know what you do and if you see the opportunity, you can be really, really successful. And then last but not least, I also like the point that was just made around investment agencies. I would also encourage that. So we have, for example, excellent experience with Invest São Paulo here in Europe. They're doing an excellent job, and I think we need more of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stephen Pinter, please.
Yes, sustainability. For us, it's key. It's our business. So I think for all the companies that have to deal with sustainability from Brazil, believe in Europe, come to Europe, do it in an integrated approach, do it really in a long-term sustainable way, not only as a selling opportunity, as a market to sell your commodity in our case, but really believe it. There might be some slowdowns now and because of the Russian-Ukraine aggression and all the geopolitical developments, but I think the green train in Europe is going on and offers a lot of opportunities to Brazilian companies to not only to do good business, but really to establish really long-term, really sustainable partnerships with European companies here that they will benefit from for a long time.
Thank you. Mr. Lucas Ferraz, please, your final comment.
Yeah, I think it's clear that this agreement is a typical win-win situation. This agreement will be very good, and it will bring significant benefits for European companies and for Mercosur companies. I usually say that there is no empty space when it comes to politics and economics, especially if you consider, the complexity of the current global scenario. So if you allow me, and I can say that as a policymaker, Brazil, the European Union would make, in my view, a big strategic mistake if the continent, if the countries do not agree, to internalize this agreement in European institutions as soon as possible. If they don't do this, other countries will occupy this empty space, and it will be bad, of course, to bilateral relations, to strengthen our bilateral relations with our historical partners like the Europeans.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot for the enlightening debate, guys. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. And we would like to invite you all to take part on the next panel, which is going to address the agribusiness opportunities and challenges. Exceptionally, the debate on the next panel is going to be in Portuguese. However, we are going to have on the coffee break room the translation to the English. So you're also invited to follow the translation in case you prefer. Thank you. dia. Bem-vindos aí todos no nosso painel sobre agronegócio. Eu gostaria de cumprimentar e agradecer aos nossos convidados nesse painel. Senhor ministro aí, Aloísio Nunes, chefe do escritório da Apex em Bruxelas, ex-ministro das Relações Exteriores do Brasil. É uma honra tê-lo aqui conosco hoje. E gostaria também de cumprimentar o senhor Daniel Valandro Tronco, sócio do escritório Felsberg Advogados e mestre em Direito Comercial Internacional pela Universidade da Califórnia. Bom, como a gente sabe, o acordo entre a União Europeia e o Mercosul levou mais ou menos 25 anos para ser construído. E um dos principais pontos de debate foi o tema do agronegócio, né, ministro? O que a gente teve? Nesse período, a gente teve manifestações cinematográficas aí de produtores rurais na Europa, a gente teve empresas europeias no Brasil se posicionando em relação à carne, em relação à soja, inclusive gerando alguns ruídos de comunicação, impactos reputacionais e relacionais aí com o nosso governo do Brasil, mas não dá para negar que os vínculos comerciais entre ambos os lados são extremamente fortes e longevos. A União Europeia hoje é o segundo principal destino das exportações agrícolas brasileiras, atrás só da China. E, ao mesmo tempo, o Mercosul tem sido um forte parceiro comercial da União Europeia e o acordo, sem dúvida, vai criar novas oportunidades para toda a comunidade da União Europeia dentro do agribusiness, à medida que está abrindo um mercado de praticamente 280 milhões de pessoas no Mercosul. Esse é um mercado enorme e que pode favorecer muito a entrada de produtos de valor agregado produzidos aqui na Europa. Apesar das objeções de alguns países com relação ao tema do agronegócio dentro do acordo, a estimativa hoje é que esse acordo provavelmente será ratificado e podendo aí entrar em vigor a partir do ano que vem. Então, eu gostaria de começar aqui a nossa conversa dirigindo a minha primeira pergunta para o nosso ex-ministro Aloísio Nunes. Quais são os principais pontos de escrutínio, ministro, e os principais obstáculos que o acordo pode enfrentar, tanto no Conselho quanto no Parlamento Europeu? Essa foi uma pergunta que a gente já teve num painel anterior, mas eu acho que é um dos pontos de maior atenção e preocupação hoje da comunidade de ambas as regiões, né?
Thank you. First of all, I speak in Portuguese, my own language. I'm very proud of my own language, but not because I'm proud of my language, which is one of the official languages of European Union, but mostly because there are many Brazilian companies watching our event, our seminary, and big companies like Suzano, they have people that speak English. They think in English, but most of the small companies and companies which are trying to get in the European market, they are not able to speak or understand English. That's why I'm going to speak in Portuguese.
Ministro, se me permite uma informação que eu acho que vale a pena. O senhor acabou de chegar de Roma e a posição da Itália é uma das posições aí mais esperadas aí de como que vai se posicionar aí ao longo das negociações. Se o senhor puder fazer um comentário em relação a isso, também seria ótimo.
Claro. Bem, o ministro Elias já explicou quais são as etapas que nós temos que percorrer até a aprovação do acordo, que foi aprovado em Montevidéu. Foi encerrada a negociação técnica, mas o acordo tem que ser aprovado agora em duas instâncias. Uma delas é o Conselho Europeu, sujeito a um voto, uma maioria qualificada, e depois ao Parlamento Europeu, com a maioria, onde deverá ser aprovado, se for aprovado, por uma maioria simples. O principal obstáculo é político. Não vejo outra razão. Nós ouvimos aqui um representante de uma organização empresarial belga, que fez uma defesa ditirâmbica do acordo, não é? Com 8 ou 10 razões absolutamente incontestáveis que recomendariam a aprovação pelo governo dos belgas do acordo. No entanto, não será assim. Por quê? Porque é uma região na Bélgica, especialmente a Valônia, que não apenas que tem uma, digamos assim, uma influência cultural francesa forte, mas também uma agricultura bastante forte. E o tema da agricultura é um tema muito delicado politicamente. Politicamente. O que um parlamentar mais quer na vida? Ele quer eleição. E quer, sobretudo, a reeleição, que é mais difícil que a eleição. Não é? E o que ele mais adora? Que é a sua circunscrição, o seu distrito. Ora, na hora da aprovação, na hora em que o acordo, tendo passado pela primeira etapa, que é o acordo, que é o Conselho Europeu, ele for submetido ao Parlamento, aos parlamentares europeus, as considerações de natureza política e natureza eleitoral estarão muito, muito presentes na decisão do parlamentar. E não é porque ele não entendeu, ele entendeu perfeitamente do que se trata. Eu fui membro de um partido que, quando havia uma discordância, as pessoas do meu partido diziam o seguinte: ele não está entendendo. Não, ele está entendendo, só que ele tem outra visão, uma visão que surge de seus próprios interesses, diferentes do nosso. Bom, então, esse acordo, ele não é que ele está sendo negociado há 20 anos, não é verdade. Ele começou a ser negociado há 20 anos, mas a negociação efetiva só se deu a partir de 2017, 2018, graças a uma conjuntura política que se verificou no Mercosul, onde nós tínhamos 3 governos de orientação liberal, Temer, o governo Macri, na Argentina, e o governo Cartes, no Paraguai, e tínhamos, no Uruguai, um governo de esquerda, o governo da Frente Ampla, inclusive com a participação do Partido Comunista Uruguaio, mas muito desejoso de ampliar o acesso aos mercados para os produtos uruguaios. Sentiam muito constrangidos com a dimensão diminuta do mercado interno e do próprio Mercosul e queriam atingir mercados mais amplos. Tanto é que queriam, inclusive, ter um acordo de livre comércio com a China. Eu cheguei a dizer para o ministro de Relações Exteriores do Uruguai, eu dizia, olha, se eu aprovar esse acordo com a China, se nós concordarmos, eu não vou poder andar na rua em São Paulo, vou ser morto a pauladas, porque, dadas as resistências que o nosso setor industrial tinha, e ainda tem, a abertura comercial. Bom, mas o acordo, basicamente, ele tomou impulso nesse momento. Houve uma conclusão técnica da negociação no final do governo, no início do governo Bolsonaro, mas depois um recuo de natureza política. Não é? Os europeus, desconfiados dos compromissos ambientais, e com razão, do governo Bolsonaro, deram um passo atrás, diante da opinião pública europeia muito apegada aos temas da sustentabilidade, né? E de tal maneira que houve uma paralisação naquele momento. Quando o governo Lula chega, é uma outra ordem de consideração relativa às compras públicas, não é? Porque, embora no texto aprovado no início do governo Bolsonaro, as bases do acordo relativo a compras públicas, como transparência, não discriminação, etc., já estivessem colocadas, havia preocupação do governo de utilizar compras públicas como instrumento de política industrial, que correspondia à visão que o governo petista tinha e tem da atuação do Estado na economia. Tudo isso levou, portanto, a um período de renegociação do acordo, em que nós demos um passo muito importante, que foi a aceitação como parte integrante do acordo, nosso compromisso com o Acordo de Paris, e depois a recalibragem da parte relativa às compras públicas, como já foi bem explicado aqui nessa reunião. Bem, a questão agrícola, ela se baseia muito, a resistência dos agricultores se baseia muito em razões de natureza política, porque eu me lembro, quando nós negociamos, eu fui parte, durante 2 anos, negociei muito intensamente o acordo, como ministro de Relações Exteriores, a parte da agricultura, o capítulo agrícola, estava inteiramente, exatamente como é hoje. Não houve nenhuma mudança substancial entre o meu tempo e agora. Não é? Sempre o acesso limitado por cotas, uma desgravação no tempo bastante prolongada, segundo alguns produtos, não é? Como já foi explicado aqui, de modo que isso, na época, isso foi aprovado sem grandes objeções da parte da França, por exemplo. Não me lembro de nenhuma objeção da parte da França. Mudou a conjuntura política francesa e que leva hoje à posição do presidente Macron a ser contrário, embora haja aqui ou ali sinais de que pode haver uma mudança em razão da mudança da conjuntura internacional. Mas é basicamente má informação, informação falsa. Eu já vi gente ser contra o acordo Mercosul-União Europeia por causa da criação de frango na Amazônia, que estaria desmatando a Amazônia. Não é? Regras, ou a acusação de que o Brasil não tem regras ambientais estritas. Ora, eu fui, como senador, participei ativamente da redação e da elaboração do Código Florestal. Eu tenho propriedade agrícola em São Paulo, eu tenho que reservar 20% da minha área, para preservação permanente. Aqui, na União Europeia, foi duríssima a tramitação de uma lei do Parlamento Europeu que estabelecia 4% da área.
E na região amazônica é 80%.
Na região amazônica, 80%. Segundo os biomas, você tem diferença, mas o mais baixo no Brasil é 20%, fora as áreas que têm que ser preservadas, áreas próximas de córregos, em costas de morro, etc. Então, nós temos legislação bastante rigorosa, sem o cadastro. Se um produtor rural não tiver o seu cadastro ambiental rural em ordem, ele não consegue vender os seus produtos. Então, nós temos uma legislação bastante rigorosa e, no entanto, isso não é divulgado corretamente. Não é? Por quê? Porque há a ideia de que a União Europeia vai ser inundada pela produção do Mercosul. Ora, como já foi explicado aqui, 99 mil toneladas de carne representam um hambúrguer por cabeça por ano de europeu. O frango é um peito de frango por ano. São cotas muito restritas e sujeitas a um prazo de desgravação bastante longo. O milho, por exemplo. Você lê o produtor de milho brasileiro, lê ali, Mercosul, vai ser isento de tarifa a partir da execução do acordo, a aprovação do acordo, nós teremos tarifa zero. Não, demora 8 anos para chegar à tarifa zero. A cada ano vai aumentando a diminuição, a tarifa intracota. Mas isso tudo é apresentado como sendo uma ameaça. E a opinião pública europeia compra isso de uma maneira acrítica. Porque também não há, do lado brasileiro, uma defesa da nossa marca. Nós não defendemos a marca café do Brasil, embora 36% do consumo do café na Europa seja do Brasil. As pessoas não sabem disso. O nosso chocolate, delicioso que se come aqui na Bélgica, é chocolate com cacau brasileiro, em grande parte, não é? Enfim, mas isso não é divulgado. Falta uma presença forte do Brasil, do governo e empresas privadas. Eu acho que o setor privado brasileiro precisa se mobilizar mais para defender a marca brasileira, colocar os seus produtos em evidência, defender a sustentabilidade, a rastreabilidade da nossa produção e trabalhar para reforçar os elos de complementaridade entre a nossa produção agrícola e a produção da agroalimentar europeia. Por exemplo, você não come a bressaula, que é uma delícia, a bressaula italiana, é feita com carne brasileira. Então, buscar esse tipo de complementariedade, entendeu?
Excelente, ministro, excelente. Bom, eu gostaria de aqui dar as boas-vindas para o senhor Pavel Cardoso, que se junta ao nosso painel. Ele é presidente da Associação Brasileira da Indústria de Café, a BIC.
Aliás, faz um excelente trabalho. A BIC faz um excelente trabalho na defesa do café brasileiro.
E eu gostaria de fazer a próxima pergunta para o senhor Daniel Tronco. Bom, tem especialistas que falam que mesmo com a aprovação e ratificação do acordo, tem outros tipos de regulamentação que podem limitar a entrada dos produtores brasileiros no continente, como o Green Deal europeu ou Pacto Verde europeu em português. E esse pacto já sofreu algumas flexibilizações aí ao longo dos últimos períodos, mas tudo indica, né, que ele entra em breve em vigor. Então, eu gostaria de ouvir um pouco você sobre esse ponto, porque, além do acordo, tem essas outras regulamentações que são extremamente importantes para a evolução do comércio entre essas duas regiões geográficas.
Bom, em primeiro lugar, muito obrigado, Lucila, pelo convite para participar do evento. Um assunto especialmente importante nos dias atuais, né, os dias onde tarifas têm sido discutidas, enfim, uma série de restrições ao livre comércio têm sido criadas. Bom, em relação à sua pergunta, né, de fato, qualquer legislação, quando a gente vai avaliar sobre o aspecto comercial, qualquer legislação que crie requisitos de sustentabilidade, naturalmente prejudica e afeta o comércio, né? Isso é inegável. Mas a gente também precisa reconhecer que a sustentabilidade hoje é um requisito, né? Não se pode mais produzir sem observância em critérios rigorosos de sustentabilidade. O ponto, me parece, é você conseguir calibrar essas exigências, né? A gente precisa de equilíbrio nas normas. E não só nas normas, né? As normas em si são extremamente importantes, mas como você, às vezes essa abordagem não é feita, mas também muito importante no meio jurídico a gente costuma chamar de obrigação acessória, né? Como você cumpre com as normas, como você demonstra o cumprimento das normas. Uma coisa é você fazer a comprovação de uma situação com a apresentação de uma ou duas certidões. Uma coisa é você comprovar a mesma situação com 10 tipos diferentes de certidões. O Green Deal e o UDR, que é um dos alicerces dessa política verde europeia, de fato traz uma série de exigências bastante rigorosas para aquele que deseja colocar a sua produção agrícola na Europa. Mas, nesse sentido, eu acho que o acordo União Europeia e Mercosul prestou uma valiosa contribuição, especialmente no que toca a forma de cumprimento dessa legislação. E essas alterações foram feitas, negociadas, especialmente através do anexo ao capítulo que trata do comércio e desenvolvimento sustentável, negociações essas mais recentes, feitas em 23 e 24. São várias as alterações que acho que vão facilitar bastante o cumprimento dessas legislações, mas eu queria ilustrar aqui algumas dessas medidas que eu acho que dão para que o nosso público possa entender. A primeira que me parece bastante relevante é que as partes do acordo, né, levem em consideração sistemas oficiais de rastreabilidade oficialmente reconhecidos pelas partes. Então, o que isso significa, né? Que se o Brasil tiver um sistema de rastreabilidade oficialmente reconhecido, o acordo do Mercosul estabelece que a União Europeia leve isso em consideração. Tá? Acho que um segundo exemplo que tende a facilitar a aplicação do acordo, a execução do acordo em benefício das duas partes, é o reconhecimento que documentos emitidos pelos países sirvam como base, sejam considerados na hora de avaliação da conformidade do produto. O que isso implica dizer? Que, por exemplo, documentos emitidos por autoridades do Mercosul sejam considerados na avaliação de conformidade pela autoridade europeia. Um outro aspecto que eu achei bastante interessante, que eu acho que tende a ajudar bastante nessa dinâmica, é que o próprio acordo com o Mercosul seja considerado para aquilo que o EUDR chama de avaliação de riscos de países. A depender, de acordo com essa regulamentação, lembrando aqui, né, o EUDR é a regulamentação que trata sobre o desmatamento, a obrigação de que a produção de determinados produtos não seja realizada, a produção não seja realizada em áreas que tenham sido desmatadas a partir do ano de 2020. Então, nesta avaliação dos países, ficou acertado no acordo que o próprio acordo do Mercosul seja considerado na avaliação. Tá? Isso não significa dizer que, em virtude do acordo, o Mercosul vai ter uma avaliação de baixo risco, mas que isso seja considerado. E isso me parece que ocorre na medida em que, no próprio acordo, há um compromisso de cumprimento com o Acordo de Paris e uma série de outras regulamentações. Então, isso deve ser levado em consideração pela União Europeia. E acho que um último exemplo de uma questão positiva trazida pelo Acordo do Mercosul é a criação de um mecanismo de mediação e arbitragem para dirimir conflitos, né? Então, na medida em que algum país se sinta prejudicado por uma norma que tenha, cuja conotação não seja efetivamente a criação de critérios de sustentabilidade, aqui um exemplo, né? Em tese se abre a porta para que os países prejudicados, para que o bloco e o país prejudicado possa levar esta questão para uma arbitragem. Uma coisa que é importante destacar, que é nesse mundo de desinformação, que a gente tem que ter cuidado. O acordo, ele não alterou o EUDR, nem o Green Deal, nem poderia ser diferente. Todos esses exemplos que eu dei aqui, na verdade, eles são mecanismos que foram desenvolvidos no acordo do Mercosul-União Europeia para que se permita se executar essas normas europeias de uma maneira mais eficiente. Então, em épocas de desinformação, é uma coisa que acho que todo mundo aqui tem comentado sobre a necessidade especialmente o Mercosul e o Brasil, colocar a sua narrativa e explicar o seu ponto de vista. O acordo do Mercosul ele não reduz ou elimina exigências de sustentabilidade do Green Deal e do EUDR. Ele simplesmente facilita a execução, cria mecanismos que vão permitir a execução mais fácil dessas políticas. Dito isso, me parece que o acordo, de fato, acaba contribuindo para que a execução dessas normas seja mais fácil.
Obrigada, senhor Daniel Tronco. Eu tenho uma pergunta agora para o senhor Pavel Cardoso. Se for possível, eu peço que as respostas sejam um pouco mais breves para a gente conseguir cobrir aqui a nossa pauta no tempo determinado. Bom, como todo mundo sabe, o café é um dos produtos mais importantes da pauta de exportação brasileira. Nosso ministro aqui já falou que a BIC tem feito um excelente trabalho aí na difusão do nosso café e da imagem do setor. Mas a gente gostaria de entender um pouco melhor como que vocês têm aproveitado esse momento para posicionar o setor do café na Europa e quais são, em breves palavras, como é que você pode falar sobre as oportunidades e riscos que vocês estão antevendo nesse momento. Outra coisa que eu acho que é importante é que existe uma preocupação com a limitação da produção de café na safra 2025, 26, quando provavelmente o acordo deve entrar em vigência. Então, queria entender um pouco também como é que vocês estão trabalhando frente a esse outro desafio da produção também.
Muito bom. Eu agradeço a todos pela oportunidade de a gente poder contribuir um pouco sobre as informações pertinentes ao café brasileiro. Desde já cumprimento e agradeço o ministro aí pelas referências elogiosas a respeito da ABIC. De fato, a entidade promove uma defesa do café brasileiro, o aumento da qualidade e o aumento do consumo do café brasileiro há mais de 50 anos. Para se ter uma ideia da necessidade, e aqui eu atendo a provocação do ministro em relação à defesa da imagem e à promoção da marca Cafés do Brasil, de quão díspare é a participação do Brasil enquanto país produtor de café e a participação do Brasil enquanto participante do PIB do café, ou seja, do comércio total global do café, e daí a necessidade de a gente fazer o investimento e dar a publicidade adequada e o valor atribuído justo ao café brasileiro, nós somos 40% da produção mundial. Nós estamos falando que 40% de tudo que o mundo tomou hoje de café e vai tomar amanhã sai do Brasil. Então, como nós temos 40% da participação da produção total e ficamos com somente 2,7% da participação do mundo, do PIB do café. E isso é muito premente em se tratando do viés brasileiro de se exportar o café enquanto commodities. Como é que a gente faz para reverter esse processo? Investindo em sustentabilidade, o Brasil fez o seu papel, o país está preparado, os nossos produtores, para atender todas essas regulamentações da UDR, e nós temos que, a partir do reconhecimento da qualidade, da sustentabilidade, fazer a divulgação. Nós iniciamos o ano passado, ministro, um primeiro passo com recursos do Funcafé e um apoio expressivo da Apex, da divulgação da marca Cafés do Brasil na Fórmula 1 São Paulo. Esse é um evento que é assistido por quase 500 milhões de pessoas ao redor do mundo e entendemos que ali seria um momento ideal, um palco ideal para se manifestar a marca Cafés do Brasil. É importante mencionar uma outra pesquisa, essa da Secafé, Conselho dos Exportadores de Cafés do Brasil, que é um parceiro da ABIC no Funcafé, no CDPC, e nessa pesquisa foi mencionado que o café é o principal item onde o europeu reconhece o Brasil como referência. Mas olha o quão destacada é essa pesquisa. 46% são os traders, naturalmente lidam com isso, sabem que o Brasil é o país do café. Quando a gente vai para os jornalistas especialistas no assunto, 26%. Mas somente 8% dos consumidores entendem o país como o produtor de café referência no mundo. Então, está aqui demonstrado a necessidade do país, efetivamente, nós, conjuntamente, iniciativa privada e poder público, investir na marca Cafés do Brasil e dar o justo valor que os nossos produtores, que as nossas indústrias, que o nosso país, enquanto produtor, merece nessa divisão dessa fatia global do comércio do café. Em relação à safra que você me perguntou, nós temos uma safra ligeiramente menor do que a anterior. Nós viemos aí de 4 anos de intempéries climáticas, 2001 com uma geada muito forte, 2023 uma estiagem que asseverou a qualidade e a quantidade da safra do ano passado, e em 2024 com um laninha controverso, onde se viu chuvas tardias e tempestades que complicaram inclusive essa safra de 2025-26. Nós teremos uma safra de robusta um pouco maior, atendendo o viés do produtor que investe mais nas suas lavouras, reduzindo a área de pastagens e investindo na lavoura do café, e uma safra de arábica um pouco menor. No total, ela será uma safra ainda restrita e não atenderá a reposição dos estoques dos países produtores e consumidores. Esperamos que a partir da safra de 2026, do ano que vem, aí sim a gente terá, provavelmente, fazendo o retrato do que temos hoje, uma reconstituição desses estoques globais de café que foram reduzidos nesses últimos 4 anos.
Excelente, muito obrigada. E eu acho que a sua resposta abre aqui uma pergunta para o ministro Aloísio, a representatividade e a importância que a Apex tem na ampliação e exposição das empresas brasileiras na Europa, né? E aí, quando a gente olha para as empresas brasileiras e do Mercosul como um todo, como é que essas empresas, o que deveria estar na lista ali de tarefas dessas empresas para aumentar a exposição delas e a participação comercial na Europa, aproveitando essa janela comercial, né? Porque agora a gente tem muita atenção em cima do Mercosul a partir da Europa. Então, assim, o que eles devem, por exemplo, participação de feiras, esforços de comunicação, o que assim, bem concretamente, o senhor acha que as empresas brasileiras podem fazer mais para ocupar mais espaço aqui no mercado europeu?
Um lugar comum, o comércio se faz com empresas, né? Empresa de um lado e empresa de outro. Então, é o conhecimento do exportador brasileiro com o importador europeu, né? Buscar entender direito o mercado ao qual ele se destina, o mercado prioritário para ele, e estabelecer parcerias com esses importadores, sejam eles cadeias de supermercados, sejam eles atacadistas, para ter parcerias corretas, visando a obter, inclusive trabalhando na linha da complementariedade da nossa exportação em relação à produção local. Eu me referi ao bressaula, que é a carne brasileira, e a produção de um produto de alta qualidade da gastronomia italiana, né? Agora, participação em feiras, sem dúvida nenhuma. A CIAL, que é uma feira que acontece na França, a Anuga, que é uma feira que acontece na Alemanha, e temos também uma versão brasileira da Anuga também. Então, participação em feiras, a divulgação por parte do governo brasileiro da marca Brasil, onde a gente puder, né? E o nosso amigo da BIC fez uma referência agora à Fórmula 1, onde o café brasileiro foi colocado em evidência. Então, são coisas que nós devemos fazer. A Apex busca... A Apex é uma emanação do setor privado brasileiro. A Apex não é uma repartição pública, é um serviço social autônomo, assim como o SEBRAE, por exemplo, serviço social autônomo, com a criação da reforma administrativa do governo Fernando Henrique. Nós temos no nosso conselho representação de muitas entidades empresariais brasileiras. E a Apex, ela fornece inteligência de mercado. A Apex tem programas que levam compradores europeus ao Brasil para conhecer vendedores brasileiros, promove, portanto, rodadas de negócio e matchmaking entre um lado e outro, né? A Apex participa na organização dessas feiras, ela está sempre presente nessas feiras, com stand brasileiro, levando o nome Brasil e abrindo espaço para empresas brasileiras, não apenas as grandes empresas, mas também pequenas e médias empresas, que às vezes encontram uma oportunidade de participar de uma feira, graças ao apoio que a Apex faz. Nós tivemos recentemente, você se referiu a isso em Roma, né, 2 semanas atrás, uma reunião que me parece exemplar, promovida em consórcio entre a Embaixada Brasileira em Roma e a Apex, onde nós reunimos empresários brasileiros, formuladores de políticas públicas brasileiras e italianos, não é? Entidades empresariais italianas do agronegócio dialogando conosco sobre a qualidade e a rastreabilidade do nosso produto. Esteve presente lá um alto funcionário da Comissão Europeia, que era italiano, por coincidência, também fazendo a defesa do acordo Mercosul e mostrando o quanto que a economia italiana ganharia com esse acordo, porque a Itália é um país-chave na aprovação do acordo. Não é? Nós teremos agora, no final do mês, 3 reuniões, a Apex promovendo com o Itamaraty, com o Ministério das Relações Exteriores, reuniões, uma em Lisboa, uma em Varsóvia e outra em Bruxelas, buscando contatos, estabelecendo contato entre a Apex e os postos nossos e os serviços de promoção comercial das embaixadas, para juntos verificarmos quais são as iniciativas que devemos que promover durante esse ano para aprofundar a relação econômica entre o Brasil e a Europa. São reuniões que vão acontecer agora no final do mês. E essas reuniões são abertas a empresários brasileiros. Queremos que participem, empresários individuais e associações empresariais brasileiras desses encontros. É uma forma do empresário brasileiro conhecer melhor aquilo que se faz aqui, conhecer os regulamentos, saber que a lei sobre desmatamento é uma lei que, para ficar, não vai ser mudada, saber que o consumidor europeu preza muito a origem do produto, sabendo se a origem é sustentável do ponto de vista ambiental e social. Então, isso são estudos sobre o gosto do consumidor europeu, e nós, a Apex, ajudamos nisso, a identificar essas características do consumidor. Enfim, é uma agência que busca abrir portas, dar informações, apoiar aquele que chega no mercado, que quer entrar no mercado europeu.
Excelente, ministro. Acho que são excelentes pontos. Bom, para a gente concluir agora o painel, eu gostaria de convidar primeiro o senhor Pavel Cardoso para os seus comentários finais. 1 minuto, senhor Pavel, aí para transmitir a sua mensagem.
Bom, a mensagem que a gente gostaria de deixar é exatamente esse mantra que a gente vem repetindo reiteradas vezes, né, Lúcia? O Brasil, enquanto país produtor, precisa ter a marca Cafés do Brasil devidamente reconhecida. E o cenário da divulgação através de uma mídia de massa que chegue ao consumo final, ao consumidor final, vai promover, em forma de uma verdadeira avenida, as exportações dos cafés brasileiros também enquanto produtos industrializados. A gente só consegue chegar à prateleira da Europa ou de qualquer outro país através da conscientização do consumidor final. Não adianta apenas os jornalistas especializados, os traders, mas é esse consumidor final que vai ter a validação desse café brasileiro aqui produzido, com a sustentabilidade e a qualidade que efetivamente o Brasil faz. Enquanto o país que produz 40% do café do mundo, é importante a gente mencionar que 83% dos nossos produtores são pequenos produtores. Então, aqui está estabelecida a sustentabilidade, a questão social e a governança que se faz tão necessário nesse mundo que exige práticas sustentáveis em toda a cadeia produtiva. Eu agradeço novamente a oportunidade e parabenizo a vocês, agradeço ao ministro por essa referência na realização desse painel.
Muito obrigada. Agora eu passo a palavra para o senhor Daniel Tronco. 1 minuto para os seus comentários finais, por favor.
Primeiro, novamente, muito obrigado, Lucila, pelo convite para participar do evento. Muito foi dito aqui durante os demais painéis sobre a necessidade do Mercosul e do Brasil se fazerem presente para explicarem, desfazer uma série de inverdades sobre como as coisas funcionam por aqui, de modo que a gente possa aproveitar essa janela e ganhar espaço com o acordo. Mas acho que tem um passo anterior a este, que na minha percepção é um trabalho de de casa que a gente precisa fazer, que é um trabalho de educação. A gente precisa entender a regra. Eu vejo muita gente falando, dando opinião, sem o devido aprofundamento, sem a devida compreensão. Então, talvez a minha mensagem é essa: a gente precisa se debruçar no livrinho e entender a regra para ver como a gente explora essas oportunidades, porque, de fato, na medida que esse acordo seja implementado, abre-se uma grande oportunidade para o negócio do Brasil e também para o europeu. Acho que, enfim, nós somos aqui um mercado de quase 290 milhões de habitantes, com um excelente potencial para o produto europeu. Então, acho que a palavra final é essa: precisamos de educação sobre a norma.
Muito obrigada. Bom, para encerrar o nosso painel, por favor, ministro, seus comentários finais.
Eu estou realisticamente otimista em relação à aprovação do acordo. Essa primeira etapa, as considerações de natureza geopolíticas, elas vão pesar muito, é a palavra dos governos. E na segunda etapa, no Parlamento Europeu, há um trabalho a ser feito junto à opinião pública, né? A opinião pública tem que ser feita pelo governo e também pelas empresas, pelos empresários que têm interesse em ingressar no mercado europeu ou fortalecer a sua presença no mercado europeu. Tem que se preparar desde já, eu acho, porque os prazos de desgravação da nossa produção agropecuária são relativamente longos, 6, 8, às vezes 10 anos. Degravação progressiva das tarifas intracotas, das cotas que não são oferecidas. Isso, portanto, leva algum tempo, mas é preciso começar desde já a estudar, buscar parcerias, entender a regra, como disse agora o representante da Felsberg, entender direito a regra, saber que algumas regras estão aqui para ficar. A regra do UDR veio para ficar. Pode haver mudança, modulação aqui ou ali, mas veio para ficar, né? A Apex está pronta para ajudar nessa compreensão. A Apex pode prestar uma assessoria de alto nível para as empresas e para o setor, para as empresas e as associações empresariais. Mas nada substitui o empenho pessoal do empresário, porque é ele que sabe. Ele que sabe como é que ele vai ganhar dinheiro, quem é que ele vai chamar para ser o seu parceiro, o seu sócio, né? Como é que ele vai colocar em evidência as vantagens do seu produto, né? Como ele vai vender a sua mercadoria da forma mais eficiente. Isso tem que começar, eu creio, essa preparação para o pleno ingresso nos benefícios que o acordo poderá trazer, e são muitos, desde já, estudando desde já as regras que serão implementadas pelo acordo. Eu aproveito para agradecer muito o convite, Ciro, que é uma das grandes referências do jornalismo econômico brasileiro, formado na bela escola da Gazeta Mercantil, né, e que até hoje uma referência importante no entendimento da economia internacional.
Bom, muito obrigada pela presença de todos. A gente agradece aí a dedicação e o tanto, eu acho que, de informações, né, que eu acho que ajudam o empresário brasileiro aí a traçar seus próximos passos para entender o acordo e se adaptar aí frente a todos os pontos aí já colocados. Eu agora passo a palavra para o meu colega Ciro Reis e convido a seguir no nosso evento. Obrigada.
Obrigado. So now it's time for a wrap-up. We have discussed many topics here related to agribusiness and government procurement, environment, industry and services. Now, and we invited our colleague from Brussels, Joris Boutel, who happens to be the founder and director of White Corporate Affairs. And Joris works on a daily basis by supporting companies interested in the European market. And we want to hear from him about his perceptions after listening to so many people talking about so many different topics. What is your perception about what Brazilian companies should do in this complex European environment?
Hello. First of all, thank you for having me and congratulations on this wonderful seminar. It was very interesting. Maybe on a small note, just to start, you organized this in the Renaissance Hotel in Brussels, in the heart of Brussels, in the EU neighborhood. And Renaissance stands for rebirth, for revival, and I think that's a very appropriate term to use today. I think free trade has been declared dead over the past few weeks, so it's a wonderful time, I think, to speak about open trade and free trade. One of the panelists referred to a song, and I quickly looked it up, and I pardon my very poor Portuguese, O tempo na para, but that perfectly summarizes my key conclusion of today. This is the time, this is your time, it is time to act and not to react. And the good thing is that there's a few good reasons for that, and that's my main takeaways from today's sessions and interesting panel discussions. First of all, I think the main issue which was referred to is, and the word which was often used today, is volatility. While entrepreneurs seek stability, and trust as well, stability and trust to invest and to do good business. And I think, first of all, that the trade agreement will provide a robust and a solid framework, and that's what people in business are after today. A second reason or second answer to that volatility is, and that's maybe a bit of a paradox, but that are the EU standards, which are often seen as a source of complexity. But, and one of the panelists also stated that, I think you can also see them as a compass for business development. At least you know where to go to. And the third answer to that volatility is the EU itself. The EU is often seen as something very slow, but at least it's stable. And I think that's what we need in these days. So I think it's a very solid trade partner, and that can help in highly volatile times. A second takeaway is that there was a lot of focus, and rightly so, on the very difficult path, the long path towards this trade agreement. And there is still a way to go. And there are counter lobbies, and there are there's a lot of criticism, and a lot of debate, which is perfectly fine. But we will get there, and we all agree on that. But my message would also be, don't be distracted by that long path, and don't be distracted by the debate on the free trade agreement. It is going to be big, and it's going to stay there. So it's also an invitation to stick to a long-term perspective in business development, in seizing the opportunities the free trade agreement will bring without any doubt. And let's not be distracted by the news of the day or of the week, which often reigns our agenda these days. Let's avoid that. A third takeaway, I think, could be that a trade agreement is not about trade in the strict sense of the word, or not about technicalities only. It's clearly also driven by values, European values, and I think we have a lot of common between the Mercosur countries and the EU countries. Values which mean that also social welfare, sustainability, and all of that has been discussed today will be on the agenda, will also be a driver for business. And reflection there, I think, is that probably misinformation could be our largest enemy. Or, on the other hand, I think getting to know each other better, understanding each other better, will be key to success also in the framework of this EU trade agreement. That goes for the Europeans, and I count myself as part of that. For example, one of the things I learned today is that Brazil is a champion in clean energy. That was new to me, and I think often we in Europe are a little bit too patronizing towards the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. We should get rid of that, and we should embrace and appreciate what other countries and other trade partners do. But obviously, it is also an invitation to the Brazilian friends and the other Mercosur countries to get to know the EU better, to get to know Europe better. And the EU is not Europe, and Europe is not the EU. The EU is I'm a big believer in the EU. It's a fantastic institution for Europe and for the rest of the world. But behind the EU indeed is 27 different member states. One of the panelists referred to that. There's not something like the US of Europe. It's highly diverse, but it's also the largest consumer market in the world. So that's obviously an open invitation, and has been stated as well. EU is open to the world. We're open to business. So let's build on that. So my conclusion would be open trade requires an open mindset, an open view on the world, getting to know each other better. This is clearly a win-win. And as our friends from Argentina know perfectly well, it takes two to tango. So let's make work of that.
Okay. So this is a very important topic when you mentioned the misinformation. I would like to underline, we in Imagem Corporativa, we made a research with our partner at University of Georgia in the US about how the international media focused the free trade agreement. So last year, the predominance was the resistance of France in terms of moving forward. And now what we see is something different. There are more open perceptions on, okay, we need to move forward in this free trade agreement because what is happening in terms of tariffs coming from the US. So this is interesting. The perceptions of the media is changing as well. And my personal takeaway, and I'm from the communication sector, is that there's a lack of narratives from Brazilian companies and sometimes from the Brazilian government or Brazilian regional governments as well, in order to sell in a better way our qualities. And you mentioned, Joris, the fact that you didn't know about the qualities of our energy metrics. There are a lot of qualities that people in Europe don't know about our country. So this is my main takeaway. Brazilian companies and organizations and executives do need to have a more strong presence in Europe and express more often our qualities. We have here today a fantastic example, which is Suzano Pulp and Paper Company. It's a global leading company in this field and exports more than 90% of its production. So it's a fantastic case. So other companies should follow this example. So long story short, my main takeaway is building narratives and have a more strong presence and showing our qualities in both the European Commission and the European Parliament, where the noise will be probably higher. But I want you to listen to my colleague Lucila, who shared with me those panels here, your main takeaway.
Right, so I think we had a very rich discussion during this afternoon here in Brussels, and there is something that one of our panelists said. Oscar, you have very good quotes, by the way. When something is scarce, it increases this its value? You saw that. May sound a bit obvious, but when we look at the political scenario we are living on global basis, and it's clearly that multilateral trade agreements are even more important now, not only for Europe, for Brazil, but for other parts of the world as well. And honestly, I'm sure that they are here to stay. I think it's a good way to show that the globalization has its very positive and important side that we can keep increasing during the next years. And one thing that I was thinking while I was hearing some of our panelists is that Brazil can also learn a lot in terms of creating and more added value products with a strong brand. So looking to the reputation field, there is a huge space to be occupied here in Europe when we look at the Brazilian products. So why not? And something that we were discussing, Mariana, yesterday, why not having a DOC, Denominazione di Origine Certificata? Sorry for my Italian. But why not? We have great cheese from Minas Gerais. We have meat from Rio Grande do Sul, where I come from. We have coffee. 80%, as mentioned, of the coffee in the world is Brazilian. Yes, we have drinks as well. And we have cacao, the Brazilian cacao, which is exported to several countries and also to Europe. So we are here in Belgium. Probably our cacao is part of the Belgian chocolates, the Swiss chocolate as well, probably. So I think there is a very interesting path to be developed in the next years, and we have lots of things to learn with the European Union as well. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
I have my last comment, and I will invite Joris to make the final comment of the session, but there's something to me that is quite important, which is to stress that Brazilian companies and organizations have some time to prepare to the free trade agreement before the ratification process. But it's not too much time. So it's just a few months ahead in order to decode the rules, to understand the ecosystem, to plan and act. Because when the agreement comes to life, this is forever. This is not flexible. And Brazilians, we are very used to be flexible in some decisions. So this is for real. It's a new championship, and companies and executives need to be really prepared. And when I say that, it's not only that exporters need to be prepared for that. Even companies, Brazilian companies that are not interested in export to Europe, they need to be prepared because new European players will go to Brazil and will compete to Brazilian companies. So even if some companies do not export, they need to be prepared the same way. So it's, let's say, it's a moment of a wake-up call for Brazilian companies in order to understand that there's a new game to start. So, and Joris, your first comments on that after listening to all that, including our opinions as Brazilians.
I assume you mean my final comments after this long session. Doing business, it's all about people. And you just referred to the survey you've been conducting in terms of media perception and so on. And I think we need to work on, as I said before, that mutual understanding, that mutual perception. And that's a matter of talking to each other and getting to know each other. And there have been 3 products mentioned different times this afternoon, which can be of great help to that. It can be coffee, it can be chocolate or beer, but let's get together and talk and get to know each other.
Okay, so we are done. I want to thank you all, people who came to the Renaissance Hotel here in Brussels, people who connected online. We had more than 120 people, specialized people connected to our conversation. We are very glad with that. And we will be in touch. We will continue to discuss this very important matter, which is the free trade agreement. And thank you for all, and see you next time.